My husband is convinced I am pregnant. I'm not, but he won't believe me. What should I do? I'm truly at a loss here. This situation has gotten worrying and I don't know what to do with it. After about a week my husband became convinced I'm pregnant. I have no idea why because I'm not. We haven't even started trying, though we do have plans in the future. We were just making conversation and yeah, I did mention feeling tired. But that's all. A few hours later he just came in so excited. I told him I'm not, but he won't let it go. He has made remarks about how happy he is, what a wonderful mother I'll be, what our baby will be like. Not all the time, but it has come up multiple times a day. I told him I'm not. I even took a test, because even I started wondering. And it was undoubtedly negative. I showed him and he just got annoyed, said tests can be wrong. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening. The next morning he acted as if nothing happened. When I tell him I'm not, he just kind of shuts me out. I lost my shit yesterday when we were in bed and he put his hand on my stomach, told him he's acting crazy. I'm not pregnant and his behavior is scaring me. He went to sleep in the guest room after that and left for work early in the morning. I haven't seen him or spoken to him today. I'm just at a loss. I don't know where this obsession is coming from. I even asked him if I gained weight, if that's what's gotten him confused. He assured me I didn't. I'm thinking of contacting his parents. Or maybe a therapist or something. I honestly don't understand what's happening and I'm worried about my husband. Edit, next day. Edit. Thank you for all the replies. I didn't expect all this. It's been overwhelming and I'm incredibly grateful. He's asleep next to me right now and I keep going through all the comments. My husband is one of the kindest people I've ever met. I promise you all that he's not trying to manipulate me, or would do anything to harm me. But that does make me believe something is really wrong. I'll contact Mai and his parents in the morning, once he's left for work. Maybe go stay with my mom for a bit, though I hate the idea of leaving him like this. I also definitely will make an appointment with my doctor for a blood test. Thank you for all the advice. Relevant comments. To a longer comment addressing the fact that this could be a delusion and delusions can become violent. OOP. Oof, this reply hit me hard. I appreciate it a lot. I'm very torn. I love my husband very much and am worried about him right now, but I feel increasingly uncomfortable at home as well. Commenter, downvoted. The whole phantom pregnancy thing usually only affects women. But one supposes a guy could have it too. Obviously as time goes on and you don't produce a bump or a baby he'll recognize that you're not pregnant. But this probably isn't some profound mental illness on his part. Just the fervid wish that you could both start working on becoming parents soon. Maybe talk to him about your timeline. At 32 he's probably just more in the ready-to-be-dad phase of life than you are in the ready-to-mom phase at 26. So remind him that you've still got time. OOP, downvoted. I'll try to do that. It just feels like such a weird response to wanting a child. Commenter, replying to OOP, this is not an urgent enough response to what seems like a pretty serious delusion. This behavior isn't normal or explicable in reasonable terms. OOP, fair, it is very unlike him. I might call my mom, ask her if I can stay with them for a bit. If only to get all of this sorted. I just want him to snap out of it. I miss my husband as I know him. Commenter, would he harm you if he thought you got an abortion? Because that's a possibility. He may accuse you of having an abortion if you get medical confirmation that you're not pregnant after he's decided that you are. OOP, I hadn't even thought of that. Sorry. Thanks for your reply, commenter. The first time I got pregnant my husband knew before I did. He had a feeling. Home test said negative but a blood test showed positive. OOP, oh my, that's wild. Either way I'll meet with my gyno, if only to have some conclusive proof that I'm not. Mini update 1 in comments. August 7th, 2024, next day after edit, things escalated yesterday. But I'm with my mom and his parents are at our place. Update post, August 9th, 2024, 2 days later, 4 from OG post. Hi everyone, I hope it's okay I post this update. I really appreciate everyone asking if I'm safe, and I am. I wish I could give clear answers but I can't. Things escalated when I tried to speak to him, keeping some of y'all's advice in mind. I sat him down and explained to him that I'd love to have kids with him in the future but that I'm not pregnant right now, and that his insistence worries and scares me. I told him we could go to the doctor together if that would put his mind at ease, or I could take another test in front of him. I was just hoping to snap him out of it somehow. He got very agitated, said many hurtful things and accused me of being a liar many times. That I'm trying to keep our baby away from him, and so on. Nothing made sense and I wasn't feeling safe anymore. I knew my husband would never harm me in any way, but that wasn't my husband. Things got worse. He did hurt me but nothing permanent or even emergency care worthy. I also know that if he was in his right mind, he never would have done anything like this. I called mine and his parents and I'm now staying with my mom. He did seem to calm down a bit when his parents arrived. I haven't seen or spoken to him since then. His mother, she's an angel, is keeping me posted about everything. We all agree something is very off about him and we don't know what it is. But he hasn't agreed to getting himself checked out in any way. I don't know how they'll go about it, but they say, and I painfully have to agree, that it's best to keep my distance for a bit, as most of it is aimed at me. I'm safe, so is he. I miss him so much and just want an answer as to why he's being like this. I keep trying to figure out if there were signs before, or what I did wrong. Thank you all for the replies, they were a great help. It's so kind you cared to ask if I'm safe. Relevant comment. Commenter, let's pray it's not drugs, since he refuses to get checked out. I'm so sorry OP, I hope everything gets better soon. I don't know if going back to him is a good idea though, he physically hurt you. OP, I do think that whatever is causing this, is the reason he hurt. We've been together for some years now and he's never even raised his voice at me up until this. OOP responds to many commenters and thanks them. Thanks. I've been reading all the comments, you guys are all so kind to me. But I'm scared shitless about what it could be, reading everyone's experience. Mini update 2 in comments, August 11th, 2024, 2 days later. He has apparently agreed to get himself checked out, but I haven't heard anything else. Mini update 3 in comments, August 15th, 2024, 10 days from OG post. He's in the hospital, many people were right about it being a medical issue. I'll get more into it at some point, maybe, but first I need to see what's going to happen with him. I've seen him a couple of times. Sometimes he's his normal self, sometimes he can't stand the sight of me. We're managing somehow. Update post 2, August 16th, 2024, 11 days from OG post. I don't know if anyone will see this here, but you've all been so kind to keep asking whether or not we're okay. I hope I'll reach you like this. I'm going to keep this short. My husband has a brain tumor. A lot of people commented on this, and I feel an immense amount of guilt that I hadn't considered it till then. All the headaches and other symptoms, in hindsight, we had previously dismissed because of his stressful work situation and so on. I'm beating myself up that I hadn't seen it before. A wonderful team of neurosurgeons, oncologists and other physicians is figuring out the best approach here, if there is one. We'll hear more in the next few days. I've spent more time with my husband. Some moments he's his amazing self, others he's filled with anger. It's difficult, but we're managing. I wouldn't have been able to without the support of our friends and family. I love my husband. This situation is terrifying. In moments of clarity he's trying to make me laugh, so I don't worry, that's who he is. Thank you everyone for pushing me to get him checked out. Relevant comments, OOP clarifies. I'm home now, but my husband's in the hospital. Commenter, in his moments of clarity does he recognize how he's been acting? Or is there always some level of reality distortion? OOP, he seems mostly very confused, if that makes any sense. He has apologized, but his mind is just not working with him right now. Commenter, OP, this is not the first time I've seen a thread on Reddit where a brain tumor caused significant behavior changes. I hope the surgeons are able to remove it and your husband's previous personality comes back. Have the doctors given you any info on what to expect after the tumor has been removed? OOP, right now it's the question if it can be removed. There's a lot we don't know right now. The doctors and nurses have been incredibly kind though. Now to the next story, story 2. My husband and I pushed our autistic son to suicide through years of mistreatment, leading to his death and causing our family to unravel. Our son committed suicide today, and our other children blame us. We do not know what to do. Posted December 21st, 2021. This is an Am I the Asshole post as well as an asking for advice one. Sorry for the long text, but please read the whole thing as there are many important details in it that I could not fit into the too long, didn't read. My husband, Robert, 59 years old, and I, Samantha, 50 years old, have had 3 children. James, 27 years old, Kate, 23 years old, and Stephen, 20 years old. When he was 6, Stephen was diagnosed with autism, and we did everything to accommodate him and get help. He kept telling us that he did not want any help and wanted to be treated like a normal person. We always tried to reassure him that he needed it to achieve the same results as other kids, and he should accept himself and be proud, and not listen to society or other people. By the way, everyone was always super accepting and did their best to accommodate, but Steven would not listen and said that he was as competent as other people and was before he got diagnosed, and we started treating him like a subhuman too. Whenever someone would try to help him, he immediately started to explain that he did not want or need any help and came up with excuses. As he grew older, Steven distanced himself from other people because he did not want anyone to know him as an autistic person. He even asked us to let him change schools and not tell anyone at the new school about his condition, which we, of course, did not allow. By the time he was in his early teens, he fell into a really bad depression and became suicidal but refused to take medication or go to therapy to treat it because, at that point, he would not accept any help from anyone at all, even if it was not for his autism. Steven claimed that the cause of his depression was the special treatment everyone gave him, and he just wanted to live as a normal person. He tried to make a compromise that if we let him go to a different school where no one knew about his autism and stopped treating him differently, he would get treatment for his depression. By then, James, Kate, and a few of Steven's teachers were encouraging us to let him do it, but we still said no. When Steven was 15, he attempted to kill himself by hanging. At 18, he finished school, got accepted into his dream university, moved out, and cut off contact with my husband and me. He still kept talking to his siblings. He left us an angry goodbye letter in which he claimed that we ruined 12 years of his life, that we were the reason why he was still depressed and suicidal, and that he hated us with a passion. He said that now he would finally not be known as a crazy, stupid, and awkward person who needs help for everything, and could lead a normal life. We tried to call him and sent him letters and emails, but he did not answer. Recently, we visited him at his university, but he would not talk to us and eventually threatened to get a restraining order, after which we immediately left. We have not heard much about him since then, but from what his siblings told us, he was doing better now, although he still suffered from depression. Anyway, today he committed suicide. From what we know, he overdosed on medication. Kate, who told us the sad news, says that we should not have given Steven any special treatment or at least stopped when he told us to, and that by treating him differently, we basically drove him into suicide. She said that we have failed as parents, and she will consider cutting contact with us too because she does not want people like us as parents. James agreed with her and said that we should at least acknowledge our mistake. Kate packed her stuff and left shortly after. She originally planned to stay for New Year's too, saying that if we want to keep a relationship with her, we should admit what we did wrong and learn from it. We, however, think that it is the fault of society with its standards and expectations, and Steven's own fault because he would not accept any help. We are absolutely devastated. Is Steven's suicide really our fault, and what can we do to save what is left of our family? Too long? Didn't read. Our son was diagnosed with autism as a child. We got all the help we could, but he did not want it. In his teens he became depressed and suicidal. He cut contact with us when he moved out. Today we found out he killed himself, and our children say that it is our fault. Our daughter threatens to cut contact as well. Are we really to blame for his death, and what should we do? Top comments. First of all, we, however, think that it is the fault of society with its standards and expectations, and Steven's own fault because he would not accept any help. Jesus Christ, how deep in denial can you get? Clearly it was your fault. In the end, it was his choice to do, but I would argue a significant percentage of it, at least 80%, was due to your horrible parenting. I mean, his siblings, the people closest to him, believe it was your fault. You need to go posting, asking people on Reddit for their opinion. All you will ever get here is nice, friendly echo chambers of what you want to hear by socially inept losers. I will likely get banned for telling the truth here, but yes, it was your fault. Furthermore, I would not say it is your fault, but he did continuously tell you what made him want to kill himself, and no one listened. I know exactly how that feels, and I'm at a point now where I have to lay in bed all day to not kill myself when the urge arises. I barely have any control left. My condolences to you and your family. I hope you guys are able to come together and support one another at some point. Additionally, in reply to the second comment, hey, I just came through something like this. And I swear, it will get better. You will not feel like this forever. Are you seeing a therapist? Check BetterHelp or an online therapist for an appointment. Do you have Teladoc? I use this to get on meds, and now I can say, without any big lifestyle changes, I mean, aside from medication, exercising sort of regularly, and eating a bit healthier, I am happy sometimes. Can you go for a walk in a park? This is something that helps a tiny bit, which is better than nothing. Please do not do it. Lastly, I am sorry for your loss. This must be a very difficult time for you. I am not in the business of telling people that it was their fault a person killed themselves. However, if you want any relationship with your remaining children, it sounds like you will need to recognize that you undermined your child's autonomy and disrespected his mental health needs for most of his life. It is clear even from your telling that that had a profound negative impact on his mental health. Your other children are grieving, and they have every reason to be angry with you. It sounds like they championed their brother the whole way. To be honest, your whole post reads as very ableist. You never allowed your son a voice in his life. You never listened to him when he consistently called out for saying he felt disrespected and othered. It might be helpful to reread your own words with that in mind. Tomorrow would have been the 21st birthday of our son who took his life almost a year ago. Posted November 28, 2022. Tomorrow would have been the 21st birthday of our son Stephen, who took his life almost a year ago. At the age of 6, Stephen was diagnosed with autism, and we did everything we could to get help and accommodations for him. Everyone was super accepting and did their best to accommodate, and we always told him to be proud and not care about social norms. However, Stephen still refused to accept any help and demanded that we stop treating him like a subhuman. No matter how many times we told our son that he needed help to get on the same level as other children, he would not accept it. As he was approaching his teens, Stephen gradually isolated himself from the world. He had no friends, no hobbies, and avoided spending time with us, although he did not mind spending it with his siblings. He avoided other kids at school, and as soon as he got home, he would lock himself up in his room and only go out when absolutely necessary. When he was 10, he also began to refuse to celebrate his birthday because it reminded him that yet another year has gone by and everything is still just as bad. Stephen ended up getting depression and suicidal thoughts and blamed it on the special treatment we gave him. We tried to get Stephen therapy and antidepressants, but he refused because at that point, he was not accepting any help at all, even for things that had nothing to do with his autism. When he was 15, he tried to kill himself by hanging, but luckily, he survived. Stephen tried to make a deal that if we let him go to a different school where no one knew that he was autistic, he would accept treatment for his depression. Even a few of his teachers, as well as his siblings, told us to let him do that, but we did not allow it because we did not think that he would get through school without help. Right after graduating school, at the age of 18, our son got accepted into his dream university, the University of Oxford, and moved out. We did not even know that he had applied to university and only found out from the goodbye letter he left. It was a very angry and hateful letter. He said that we ruined 12 years of his life and went on a rant about how much he hated us. He cut off all contact with us but kept talking to James and Kate and blocked us everywhere. We tried to contact Stephen from other numbers and emails and sent him letters, but he never answered. According to our other children, he was studying chemistry and biology. He had always expressed an interest in those and science in general growing up, and in his last years with us, he also said that he wanted to get a PhD and become either a pharmacologist or an organic chemist, although we thought that would be too hard for him. He had even made some friends. My husband Robert and I visited him at university at the beginning of last November. But he would not talk to us and even said that he would get a restraining order against us if we did not leave him alone. About a month after that, he attempted suicide again, this time by overdosing on medication, and unfortunately, he succeeded. Kate blamed us for his death, saying that he repeatedly told us how much he did not want to be treated differently, but we never listened. She has since also cut off contact because she could not and did not want to forgive us for killing her brother. Our other son James has also been visiting and talking to us much less since then. In just a couple of months, we have lost pretty much all of our children. We have tried to distract ourselves, but with Stephen's birthday coming up, we can only think of him and our other children, even if they have abandoned us and he did not like to celebrate his birthday. Relevant comments. First of all, I am so very sorry for your losses. The pain from losing your child to suicide never relents. You can learn to distract yourself, but the pain is always with you. I hope you and your husband get through the day by supporting each other, knowing that you did what you thought was best, and find ways to distract ourselves again after the day has passed. Furthermore, parents do not lose all 3 of their kids over nothing. Trust the kids always, even when they are grown adults. Bad kids do not cut off their parents, they take advantage of them. Also, going no contact hurts too. We have a love-hate relationship with abusive parents. Psychological abuse is brainwashing. So keep in mind that kids going no contact are also in a great deal of pain, but the pain is made worse by being around their parents who do not take even an ounce of accountability. If they do not take account, the abuse continues, and at some point, self-preservation is only possible by cutting off contact. Psychological abuse makes you have no self-worth. You feel like nothing from your parents and without your parents. If you read this from that perspective, maybe you will see otherwise. "We thought that would be too hard for him," is a snide comment to say about your now deceased son. So just imagine what they might have said to his face behind closed doors. They did not even mention being proud of the fact that he did so after they said it. Moreover, I usually just lurk, but I felt I had to make an account to say this because everyone else seems afraid to address the elephant in the room. How you treated your son was not okay. Your son, time and time again, did not want to be treated the way you and your husband treated him. He made it very clear he did not want to see you or your husband again. I have gone through a similar experience where I was the one chasing after someone as well, and it was very wrong for me to do so. I know it sucks that your son wanted you to be completely out of his life, but you have to respect his decision. You were not able to respect this, and from what I have read, it looked like it contributed to his degrading mental health. I do not know the rules of this subreddit, but I do not think it is constructive to reinforce this type of behavior. Others in this thread are hesitant to criticize and some are being supportive, which is not healthy. It is important to criticize where criticism is needed. You are allowed to grieve the loss of your son despite this. I am in no way downplaying the pain you and your husband are going through with the loss of your son. His passing was his decision at the end of the day, but you have to understand that you and your husband were not good parents to him. This is fully based on what you have typed, and I can only judge based on that. Lastly, I lost my sister to suicide 1 week ago. She was 15, and I had basically raised her. I feel your pain, and I am so sorry for your loss. Reply to the last one. If you need help with some resources, you can message me. I have lost 2 people this way. I just want you to know you are not alone. How do we get our daughter to talk to us again? Posted December 12, 2022. We miss him so much. Our daughter, Kate, 24 years old, completely stopped talking to us about 10 months ago. She did this because, according to her, we are to blame for her younger brother's, 21 years old, suicide, which happened about 1.5 months prior to Kate cutting off contact with us. However, at the time of his suicide, he had already been no contact with us for over a year. He left for university, stopped talking to us, and blocked us everywhere immediately after graduation. We did not even know he had applied for university, with the exception of one time when we visited him at university, and even then, he did not talk to us. Kate's other brother, James, 27 years old, still regularly talks to her, and we have tried to get him to encourage her to talk to us again. However, he refuses because he thinks that Kate does not have to talk to us if she does not want to, and he also believes that our youngest son killed himself because of us, even though it does not make any sense. She does not talk to any of her other relatives. We have reached out to her on social media, but she did not answer. Although we knew where she lived until recently, we visited but she was never home. According to her brother, she moved to New York City this September because she enrolled in a PhD program at some university there, so we do not even know where she lives now. What can we do to get Kate to talk to us again? Relevant comments. First of all, I am sure this hurts, but I think you need to do some self-reflection. Your son stopped talking to you and later committed suicide. Why do you think he stopped talking to you? Only you can answer that question. Now you have a daughter that will not talk to you either. She blames you for his suicide. You keep saying it is not your fault because he had already cut you off, but again, why? If she ever talks to you again, and there is something for you to apologize for, you may want to start thinking about it now. Based on the very little I know, I am guessing something in your parenting over the years was lacking. Furthermore, I am sure you are heartbroken. I cannot imagine the anguish you are feeling, losing a child to suicide and the other children separating from you by choice. Something needs to be addressed and acknowledged within the family history. Until then, there is no healing. I hope you can go into counseling for your family's sake, if not for your own. Moreover, leave her alone and respect her agency. That is what you can do. You have a child who went no contact and killed himself. You have another child who is no contact and a third child whose boundaries you constantly challenge to get your way. Stop it. You are lucky your son talks to you, and if you keep it up, you will lose him too. You are not entitled to a relationship with your children. You do not get to make these demands. You can go to therapy, work on yourselves, and try to figure out how to live a better life. Every time you push the boundary with your son or try to contact your daughter, you prove you are exactly who they think you are. Selfish people who care more about your own desires than what is best for your kids. What you can do is stop harassing your daughter. Additionally, if 2 of your kids have both decided to cut you off, it may be time to think about what you could have done better in the past. There must be a reason for them to stop talking to you, right? Especially if they have just become adults and started living on their own, there might be a point where they realize that life could be better without you for some reason. Not to say you can be blamed for anything, But it might help to think about it and maybe apologize for anything that comes to mind which might have made your son cut you off in the first place. Lastly, I am so sorry for your loss. All you can do is give your remaining children space to follow their consciences while you always leave the door open for them to make contact one day. Or not. Please go to counseling too. In reply to the fifth comment, I resonate with this comment deeply. However, the parents need to go to therapy, hopefully if they can afford it. There is a huge chunk of self-awareness and trauma they need to work through. Also, understand that their kids are adults. Their relationship has changed, and the parents must respect this new aspect of the adult-parent and adult-child relationship. My husband's drinking problem is getting out of control. What can I do? Posted December 18, 2022. I am a 51-year-old woman, and my husband Robert, who is 60 years old, has had a drinking problem for somewhat over 2 years now. He usually drinks vodka and occasionally wine and has 5 shots of vodka on weekdays and sometimes up to a whole bottle on weekends. When he drinks wine, it is even more, and he will sometimes have an entire bottle during the week. When he is drunk, he is extremely angry, and although he does not get physically aggressive, he screams and yells a lot. I basically do not get any real time with him, with the exception of a few occasional hours on a weekend, because he gets drunk as soon as he gets home on workdays and often starts drinking by around noon on weekends as well. His drinking problem comes in waves. With my help, he has managed to get it under control multiple times, and although he would still drink almost every day, it was usually nowhere near enough to get him drunk. However, it always gets worse again. He only began intensively drinking about 2 years ago when our youngest son applied to university without us knowing and then cut us off when he went off to said university. My husband felt very angry and betrayed, and he still does, and that is when he resorted to alcohol. Before that, he would only drink on special occasions like holidays, parties, and date nights, and even then, he almost never had enough to get drunk. I feel like I have lost him since his drinking problem began, at least during the waves when it is really bad, because he is drunk most of the time and then all he does is just scream around. What can we do to end his drinking problem? Relevant comments. First of all, the problem with any addiction, whether it is alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, gaming, etc., is that it is the addict's problem. They are the ones who have to want to fix themselves. Nothing you say or do will change that. Get some therapy for yourself. This is an extremely dysfunctional and toxic cycle, which is something you can work on. I wish you the best. Moreover, I was married to an alcoholic for 14 years. I went to Al-Anon twice and was told there was nothing I could do to change him. If he wanted to change, he would. The only person I had the power to change was myself, including my kids. It took a year or more, but I started making the life I wanted. I begged him to come along, and he chose the booze. I moved on, and he was dead within 3 years. In reply to the second comment, 2 of our 3 kids have cut off contact with us for reasons unrelated to the drinking problem. One of them, the one mentioned in the post, eventually committed suicide. The one that still talks to us only does so rarely, around twice a month. I cannot afford to lose my husband too emotionally. As I already said, our son cut us off, which caused my husband's drinking problem, and eventually killed himself. Our other children blame us for his suicide, and then our daughter did as well. I only have our son, and he only talks to us maybe twice a month, and my husband left. Furthermore, there is no we in quitting drinking. If he does not want to stop drinking himself, there is no way you can make him do it. Unfortunately, that is how it works. You have to want to help yourself first, and you actually have to help yourself first. Nobody else can do it for you or tell you how to do it. You personally have to accept that you're an alcoholic and go forward with that. Good luck, I hope it works out. In reply to the third comment, I cannot afford to lose him too. 2 of our children have cut us off. One of them, the one mentioned in the post, committed suicide, and our oldest, who fortunately still talks to us, only does so rarely, maybe 2 times a month. If I leave him, I would have pretty much none of my family left. Replying again to the third comment, I am sorry, but you have already lost him. At this point, all you are doing is enabling him. There is a very thin line between helping an alcoholic and enabling them, and you have crossed it. I can understand why you do not want to leave him and why you think that sticking around is actually helping, but it is not. My mother did the same to my father, and she ended up losing all of her children due to her codependency and insistence on protecting, enabling, and defending her husband. I would advise that you get some therapy, either from a therapist that specializes in addiction and grief or Al-Anon. You 2 are trauma bonded at this point and are stuck in a very dysfunctional and toxic cycle. Additionally, Your husband started drinking because you and he treated your son like he was the village idiot because he had autism. And clearly, he was highly intelligent. You both did not know anything about your son, and when he left to go to Oxford, which you mentioned in a previous post, it was probably a wake-up call for him about how much you damaged your relationship with your son. He has regrets, and you have willful ignorance. Lastly, you are a terrible person. Your husband is angry at his son's betrayal. You betrayed your son his whole life. He is angry at his son and still is, but he is not sad his son died. No, he is angry that his son betrayed him, and you only care about getting him to stop drinking for your personal time. Everything that is happening now is karma for driving your son to kill himself. There is blood on your hands, yet you are too cold, proud and uncaring to admit that. Your post about his death rings so hollow. I feel sorry for all those related to you and your husband. Now to the next story, story 3. After years of my dad enabling his entitled wife's toxic behavior, I finally went no contact when she attacked my kid over a wedding dispute. I attempted to share this story on Am I the Asshole? Through a different account a couple of days ago, but it did not go through. Considering the trigger warning, it is understandable. Since then, I have concluded that my wife and I made the right decision, so this will be my final attempt to post this story. I have tried to include more information and adjust the wording slightly. All names mentioned are fictitious. My stepmother, who is 49 years old, fancies herself a party planner. She has assumed the responsibility of organizing and hosting every party and holiday my dad's family has held since marrying him. I never enjoyed those occasions growing up. She is controlling and gets upset if anyone complains about anything, but I tolerated it for my dad's sake. According to him, this helps her feel included. I am getting married to my fiancée, Jane, who is 26 years old in July. We got engaged in early 2021, but Jane became pregnant a couple of months later, and we decided to postpone the wedding to focus on our son for a while. So, we have had a long engagement. From the very beginning, my stepmother has tried to take over our wedding plans, complaining, contacting our planner, showing up unannounced at Jane's dress appointments, and more. We have repeatedly asked her to stop. My dad wants us to humor her, but she is clearly resentful that she is not hosting the wedding or being labeled as mother of the groom on the invitations. Besides our baby boy, we also have Luke, a 4-year-old, who is Jane's paternal half-brother. She gained custody of him a few months into our relationship after his parents passed away. I moved in with them during the pandemic and have been in Luke's life since he was a baby. He doesn't call me dad and refers to us as his sister and his OP, but we love him like a son. My stepmother, however, hates Luke. She accuses Jane of baby trapping her way into the family. This accusation only worsened after our son was born. My dad gets along with Jane and adores the kids, but my stepmother demands that he refuse to babysit Luke, so we rarely leave the kids with him. Instead, Jane's brother and sister-in-law usually watch the kids for us, as their children are close to ours in age. Last Sunday we had an event, and my brother-in-law was out of town with his family. Jane's other siblings live in different cities, as do my mother and sister. My father agreed to babysit at our place, so we left the children with him. When we returned, we found both kids crying, my stepmother screaming, and my father weakly trying to calm everyone down. Apparently Luke had told my stepmother that both he and our son would be the ring bearers at our wedding, and she lost her temper. She screamed that she would not allow that because he was not family. This escalated to the point where I needed to include a trigger warning. When Luke started crying, his lip was still split. She had never gone this far before. We immediately banned her from our house and our wedding. My father is furious and has said he will not attend without her. He has also convinced half of his side of the family, including my stepbrother, to boycott the wedding by severely downplaying what my stepmother did. My stepbrother fully agrees with his mother, no matter how many times I try to tell him the truth. Jane and I are steadfast in our decision, but many of my cousins, who are now not coming to the wedding, are asking us to reconsider. Almost all of Jane's family supports our decision, although one of her aunts suggested that my stepmother might be acting out because she does not feel welcomed by my family. I have honestly reached my limit with my family's enabling of her behavior. I love my father and really want him at my wedding, but I am more than willing to let him go if it means protecting my family. Edit. I believe I accidentally deleted the paragraph where I mentioned this, but we did press charges. We took Luke to the pediatrician the following day and gathered every piece of evidence we had. Not only did we have pictures of Luke's face, but, by some miraculous strike of luck, we also had nanny cam footage. Some commenters correctly assumed that my stepmother had not been invited to our house, but my father has not really gone anywhere without her in years, so we took precautions. We did not expect her to actually do anything this terrible, but we have never trusted her with the kids. The physical attack happened off camera, but there is some footage of her screaming and Luke crying before and after the event. She now has a child abuse charge on her record. We would not let her get away with this. Edit 2. There is a lot of additional information I want to add. I will try to respond to at least some of the comments. I did not expect the amount I have received so far, but for now, I will add that Luke is okay. The visit to the pediatrician happened the day after the incident. He already had a counselor because Jane was quite traumatized when her dad and stepmom died, and she was worried it might affect him. We have continued with his treatment. We have been hugging and pampering him a little more than usual too. He is still upset but is already doing much better. Update: the entitled stepmother has managed to get herself banned from my wedding. I want to thank everyone who took the time to read and/or comment on my previous post. It has been a tough week, but it is always heartening to know that people care. Although I have not been able to reply to every comment, I will try to address some in this update. This might get a bit lengthy. To begin with, Jane and I have decided to go no contact, NC, with my father and my stepmother. We have not really spoken to either of them since the incident, and I do not intend to be the one to reach out. Any communication between us is being handled by my younger sister, who is entirely on our side, but we maintain low contact for the time being. I have chosen to adopt Jane's approach to dealing with people she cares about. Forgive what is apologized for, but never forget. Essentially, if my dad or stepmother ever truly understand what they did wrong and sincerely apologize, we are willing to forgive them, albeit reluctantly. However, we will never ignore or let them forget the harm they caused our family. For now, neither of them will be allowed near Luke, our baby, or any future children we may have, even if we do eventually forgive them. Regarding the rest of my family, I read numerous comments suggesting that I post pictures of Luke's face as well as the nanny cam footage. Although I am not very active on social media, even if I were, I would not feel comfortable exposing my injured preschooler in that manner, especially given that nothing on the internet ever truly disappears. I also decided not to share the pictures with my family unless it is absolutely necessary. It is worth mentioning that while my family adores my father, most of them are not very fond of my stepmother. She had 2 failed marriages prior to meeting my father, the first of which resulted in my stepbrother, and my father cheated on his then girlfriend to be with her. My family loved that girlfriend and disliked my stepmother from the beginning. Not only has she been controlling and manipulative from the start, but she has also tried to force her way into the role of the family matriarch by any means possible. Taking over the planning duties for every family event was her favorite way to do this because of all the attention and compliments that come with it. The primary reason I disliked these parties while growing up was that my stepmother always managed to make everything about her, even events like Christmas and my sisters and my birthdays. The rest of the family felt indifferent towards her, but they never truly liked her. However, things were different with Luke. Most of my relatives did not meet him until COVID restrictions were eased, and by that time, he was already 2 years old. He is a bright and genuinely lovable child, and since there were no other small children in the family, everyone immediately began doting on him. From my perspective, my stepmother was upset that Jane and Luke were so easily accepted by my family, which was a stark contrast to her own experience, and this fueled her resentment towards them. Although I cannot confirm this, she was also angry that she had no role in planning the wedding or being part of the wedding party. She tried to pressure us into letting her officiate, but that role had already been offered to one of Jane's best friends a year ago. My stepbrother was not interested in being my best man, and I had already chosen my best friend for that role. We had asked Jane's sister's daughter to be our flower girl, and we had promised Jane's 3-year-old niece. Also, her sister's daughter is 15 and does not know us well. She even tried to convince us to let my father walk Jane down the aisle since her father had passed away, but her eldest brother, the brother-in-law I mentioned earlier, had already been enlisted for that role. My stepmother was disappointed that my family was not as involved in the wedding as Jane's family and kept making comments about how things would be different if she were in charge. Despite all of this, nothing justifies being that terrible to a child, especially if it stems from the petty jealousy I suspect. Since I have not spoken with my father, my sister has been keeping me informed about his activities. Through her I discovered that the story my father and stepmother told the rest of the family completely omits Luke's injury and the abuse charges. They implied that Jane and I banned them out of annoyance with my stepmother and decided to take it out on my father as well. Given that most people already disliked my stepmother, explaining what actually happened that night was not difficult, and most of the relatives I wanted at the wedding have since apologized and are criticizing my father. The people who did not believe us, as well as those claiming we overreacted, have been told they are no longer welcome in our home. These individuals are mostly from my father's generation, so I am not surprised. However, realizing that they are so biased that they would protect a woman they hate after she hurt a child, just to make my father happy, has convinced me that I do not need any of them in my life. My stepbrother is still in denial. He refuses to accept that his mother could harm a child, despite all the evidence we have. I must admit, I understand his perspective. I love my mother too. But that does not excuse his blindness to the situation, so he is also banned. It is unfortunate because we were close growing up, but I have no regrets. Additionally, Jane has 3 other siblings besides Luke. The older brother-in-law, a twin brother, and a younger sister, and I am closer to them than I ever was to him. Regarding Jane's family, they are all furious about what happened and have been incredibly supportive. Jane's maternal relatives essentially adopted Luke after she gained custody of him, and they frequently call to ensure he is okay. With the money saved from those we uninvited, we decided to help Jane's cousin. She lives in another country and was previously unable to attend the wedding, so we are covering her plane ticket. Luke is doing much better and is nearly back to his cheerful self. His split lip was shallow, healing slowly but did not require stitches. A few days ago, we sat him down and explained that my father and stepmother would no longer be around. Although he really liked my dad, he understands that my dad and stepmother are inseparable. Luke is clearly scared of her, but we are doing our best to make him feel safe. Jane and I have reassured him that he is family, we love him, and no one will ever change that. I am not too worried about my dad or stepmother trying to show up at the wedding, but we have alerted the venue and provided them with pictures just in case they try anything. It is better to be safe than sorry. Some people brought attention to the fact that SM is a hypocrite for saying Luke isn't family. I agree for obvious reasons. Her main excuse for pretty much everything she does is that she doesn't feel like my family welcomes her. Dad has been guilting me to take part in everything she plans by reminding us of that for as long as I can remember. The way he continues to make excuses for her without realizing this is basically a case of the pot calling the kettle black, except Luke actually is family. This has made me accept that while I will always love my dad, it's not healthy or safe for me and my family to be around him anymore. It hurts to know my son won't have his only remaining biological grandfather in his life, but he has 2 amazing step-grandpas to make up for it. For now, I'm sad but satisfied with how things have turned out. I don't like to complain about my life. It's a mess, but a beautiful one. I love my fiancé, I love my kids, and I'm lucky enough to love my job. We're happy. I'm not letting anyone ruin that. For those who were bothered by my censorship in my previous post on Am I the A, it was Jane who suggested that I make the writing less explicit. Since I am still getting used to Reddit, I may have gone a bit overboard. I hope this will be my final update on this story, but I will keep you informed. Again, thank you all for your love and support. Best wishes to everyone. Update 1. My stepmother, my family, and my children. I will start by saying that this may disappoint many people. We are beginning to accept the likelihood that my stepmother will only receive a minimal punishment. Jane and I are consulting with our lawyer about our next steps, but we are still uncertain about how to proceed. It is too early to determine anything definitively, so we are trying not to get ahead of ourselves more than we already have. However, I'm relieved to announce that we're getting started on the process for a restraining order against stepmom. We're using the same evidence we gathered the week following the incident, including the nanny cam footage and pictures of Luke, and we'll focus on that for the time being. I still haven't spoken to my father. My sister is still in LC but is seriously considering cutting ties with him. Because my sister is the only one on my side that still talks to him, my father keeps trying to ask her about me and whether I've calmed down yet. According to her, he's annoyed that half of his family refuses to talk to him but still doesn't seem to accept why. I told my sister that she doesn't need to keep playing messenger pigeon between me and our father. I never asked her to do it, and it's clearly taking a toll on her, but she insists she'll stop when it feels right. Either way, there is absolutely no doubt whether SM attacked Luke. Not only did Luke say it the moment we got home, but that was also confirmed by my father in a failed attempt to defend her behavior. He never tried to hide it from us. That and the fact that he gave Luke an ice bag are literally the only positive things I can say about his actions. SM was too busy screaming about how much of a whining brat Luke was being to deny it. To those who guessed SM is younger than my dad, you get an invisible cookie. She's also 5 years younger than his previous girlfriend. They got together when I was around 15. Also, stepbrother is only a month older than me. She turns 50 later this year, had him at 21, and married his father a year later. Both our kids are doing mostly okay. Luke's back to running around the house in his Superman costume whenever he doesn't have anything better to do. He did have a few nightmares this past week and has asked to sleep in our bed twice. We don't mention my father around him, and he's still seeing his counselor. Our 14-month-old son has learned 2 new words. Hi, and, bye. And Luke is trying to teach him to say his name. Jane's sister, who moved away for college, is coming over for a couple of days to celebrate her 21st birthday later this month. Luke is excited to see her, and Jane is excited to get drunk with her. Can't say I blame her. We're hoping her presence will cheer us all up. I'm not doing so good, and neither is Jane. She's usually the kind of person who tries to keep her negative emotions to herself. But she cried herself to sleep almost every night the week it happened. It breaks my heart to see her like that, and I can't help but feel like this is my fault. There's a part of me trying to tell myself I had no way of knowing SM would do anything like that, but that doesn't really change anything. I allowed my father near my kids unsupervised, even though I knew she'd probably tag along. This is the guiltiest I've ever felt, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. Jane has been doing better recently and is encouraging me to see a therapist. I have never really done that before, except for seeing a psychiatrist when I was younger, but now seems like the right time to try it. I was taken aback by a few messages this week from people suggesting that I forgive my father and stepmother and even invite them back to the wedding. That is definitely not happening. In fact, I am not willing to ever forgive my stepmother. My father is now a very uncertain possibility, but I will never understand or forget what she did. Although the wedding is currently the last thing on our minds, we are not postponing it. We did consider rescheduling, but the date we chose is the only one that works for our guests. We have set up passwords with all our vendors and instructed them to only communicate with us. Jane's family is larger and closer knit, which is why they are more involved in the wedding than mine, but I still have family participating. My sister is one of the bridesmaids, 2 of my cousins are groomsmen, and my mom will walk down the aisle with the wedding party. Going through all of this with Jane has made me realize even more how much I love her. I could not ask for a better partner to start a family with, and I cannot imagine what I would do without her. This ordeal has not torn us apart, and I am incredibly grateful for that. I probably will not make any more updates until after the wedding unless something significant happens in the meantime. As always, best wishes to all of you. Update 2. I saw my father and stepmother for the first time since she attacked my child. I did not plan on updating again before the wedding, but something quite significant happened. The good news is that we got the restraining order. The bad news is that Jane and I had to see both my stepmother and my father at the court hearing. This was our first time seeing them since we expelled them from our home over a month ago, and neither of us was looking forward to it. We left the children with Jane's brother and sister-in-law, so at least Luke did not have to see them. The hearing proceeded much faster than I had anticipated. I must give credit where it is due. My father was at least wise enough to realize they had no chance of winning. There was a substantial amount of evidence against them. We had nanny cam footage, pictures of Luke, his medical records, and my sister had compiled every text and email my stepmother had sent to her and the rest of the family regarding the incident. Additionally, there were numerous phone recordings of my stepmother discussing the events. They did not even bother to hire an attorney for the hearing. The judge issued a protection order against my stepmother, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of us or our property. We are changing all our locks this week, and I am also considering changing my phone number. I have to admit, leaving the courthouse was the first time I felt truly safe since this entire ordeal began. Jane was on the verge of tears with happiness when we got to the car. We picked up the kids and celebrated at McDonald's with my brother-in-law and his family. Hours later, my father called me. The protection order does not apply to him, so he is still able to contact us. Jane and the kids were in bed, so I answered. I didn't expect him to change his mind and apologize all of a sudden, but decided to give him one last chance. He tried to start some awkward small talk, but I told him to get to the point. He asked me if the order was truly necessary. I stated very clearly that SM was never coming near Jane or my children again, and that I was glad I had the RO to formalize that. Every excuse he had for SM was pretty easy to shut down. But she only hit him once. Yep, and that's enough for me. The kids need their grandma. She's not their grandma, Mom is. She's my wife. You need to respect her. She attacked Luke. She disrespected my family and my own house. I don't owe her anything, least of all my respect. He then went on a rant about family, how much of a godsend SM was, and everything she'd done for me and my sister since she came into our lives. I replied by listing every time I could remember about her lying, overstepping a boundary, or acting unhinged around me, my family, or my sister. I brought up both my adult life and my youth. Examples included her attempts to hijack most of our milestones recently, our wedding plans, our son's birth, Jane's baby shower, and my sister's college graduation, her obsession with the idea of a perfect family, and her disgusting attitude towards Luke. I also made sure to mention her habits of going through mine and my sister's stuff when we were younger. It's trivial compared to everything else, but this behavior went on until my sister moved out of their house only 3 months ago. We're pretty sure she found out about Jane's wedding dress appointments by reading my sister's planner while she wasn't home. For instance, some of the memories I mentioned are long and hard to explain, but they did cement the fact that SM means nothing to me. He tried to go with the whole "she doesn't feel included" excuse again, but I shut him up. I said he'd had the opportunity to protect his grandchildren but had chosen his monster of a wife instead. And that's enough for me to want nothing to do with him. I hung up without saying goodbye. My sister informed me that he called her afterward, and she told him she was going no contact with him as well. I think we are both beginning to accept that our father will not change. It is unfortunate, but he has made his priorities clear, and his children and grandchildren are not among them. That is all for now. With these memories fresh in my mind, I am considering sharing some of the stories I reminded my father of. But that will take some time. Until then, best wishes to all of you. Update 3. My stepmother attempted to hijack our baby shower. In my last post, I mentioned that I was thinking about sharing some stories from before I obtained the restraining order against my stepmother and went no contact with my father. While there are many worth recounting, I will start with one of my sister's favorites. My fiancée Jane discovered she was pregnant in June 2021, and we announced the news to our immediate families in August. Initially, my stepmother was completely uninterested in our baby. Not that I expected much from someone whose reaction to our pregnancy announcement was to ask Jane if she was sure the baby was mine. Even my father criticized her for that one, but she barely seemed to acknowledge our pregnancy. Instead, she focused more on my stepbrother, who was also engaged and would soon provide her with beautiful grandchildren. We did not complain, as we did not want her involved, and we did not even have to say anything. Organizing our baby shower turned out to be quite a challenge. Jane and I had to work until the holidays, and I wanted to be actively involved in the planning. With our due date set for February 2022, we decided that early January would be the ideal time for the shower. We enlisted my sister Laura and Jane's best friend Nina to help us plan the event. Jane and I are generally laid-back people, so we didn't want an extravagant party or to spend too much money since we were saving for both the baby and the wedding. We decided early on that the shower would be co-ed and, given the time of year, would need to be held indoors. We settled on a guest list of 25 people plus about a dozen kids. We came up with the idea of hosting a pizza party. Since moving in together, Jane, Luke, our brother-in-law and sister-in-law's surrogate son, and I have enjoyed homemade pizza nights every week, and we thought it would be fun to incorporate this tradition into the shower. Nina found an event venue with a pizza oven, and Laura figured out ways to integrate traditional baby shower elements into our theme. The resulting plans were fantastic. Guests could make their own pizzas, enjoy non-alcoholic drinks, and children could customize plain bodysuits. Nina and Laura blended pizza-themed decor with baby-themed decor and even found pizza-shaped sweets. It initially seemed like a chaotic mix, but they made it work beautifully, and we loved the outcome. By the middle of November, most of the planning was complete. Well, later that month my stepbrother's fiancée left him for her ex. They'd been together for 4 years at that point, and it was both sudden and traumatizing for him. He was devastated. SM then realized the grandkid she dreamed of would take longer to come than she thought, so naturally, without her son's milestones to obsess over, she moved on to mine. Suddenly my stepmother went from an aloof relative to an excited grandma-to-be with Facebook posts, tacky, promoted to Nana shirts, and the whole 9 yards. At first we were too busy finishing things up at work and getting ready for the holidays to worry about that, but it didn't take long for her to start pestering us about planning the baby shower as well as a gender reveal. We denied the possibility of a gender reveal party. No offense to those who like them, but we don't. Plus we had decided to wait until birth to find out the sex. SM tried to get us to find out and tell her as a Christmas present, but we didn't. We also denied her the baby shower. She told my father, and he told Laura to let SM help out with the plans. She was still living with them at the time, so she didn't have much of a choice. She called Nina, and they met SM for coffee. Though I wasn't there for that meeting, Laura told me what happened later. Before Laura and Nina could even discuss their plans, my stepmother immediately launched into her own. According to Laura, she pulled out a surprisingly thick binder from her bag, complete with the words "Oh Baby" on the cover, colorful tabs, and pieces of fabric sticking out. She then flipped straight to the section dedicated to the baby shower. Although it was shorter compared to the rest of the binder, It was still lengthy and focused solely on her vision for the baby shower. Laura sent me pictures, and I have to admit, it looked like the most Instagram-worthy baby shower ever. However, it was also barely functional and clearly very expensive. The decorations included balloons, oversized teddy bears, giant alphabet blocks, and cringe-inducing signs. Stepmother prioritized aesthetics over comfort, with uncomfortable chairs and fancy food ideas that didn't even look edible. Most of the food contained soft cheeses, which Jane couldn't eat. The color palette consisted of 3 different shades of pink with gold accents. We would have been okay with a pink-themed shower if there was some variety. But stepmother's pictures looked like Barbie had thrown up all over Hello Kitty's birthday party. When Nina reminded her that we didn't know the baby's sex, stepmother insisted she just knew it was a girl. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. She also wanted an all-female child-free party with fancy caterers and alcohol. Her guest list included some of her closest friends, but neither Jane's nor my mother's were on it. She also planned party games that no one had any interest in. Essentially, the only thing everyone could agree on was to hold the party indoors. Laura and Nina were not given the chance to present their plans until stepmother was finished. Once they had the opportunity, they explained that although they could incorporate some of stepmother's ideas, the pizza theme had already been decided. She tried to object, but Laura firmly stated that it was generous of them to even consider incorporating her ideas, given that the shower was a month away and we had already approved their plans. Stepmother even called me to try to persuade me to change their minds, but I just echoed what Laura had said. My father had discovered he couldn't attend the shower, so he no longer had any influence over the plans. As the holidays approached, the topic was dropped, and my stepmother seemed to accept the pizza party idea. Nina cleverly paired some of the pink decor stepmother wanted with matching blue items, and even included one of the huge teddy bears. Fast forward to a week before the shower. Jane was nearly 8 months pregnant. All the decorations had been bought. The guests had RSVP'd, and everything was set to go. The shower was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m. Stepmother offered to arrive early to prepare everything. Laura agreed, knowing that stepmother would complain if she did not get help, and the venue allowed them to drop off decorations ahead of time. Jane and I promised to arrive at 6 p.m. However, 2 days before the shower, the venue contacted Nina. They informed her that stepmother had dropped off large heavy boxes, calling them a little surprise for us. She told them she planned to arrive at 3:30 p.m. to start setting up. The venue was calling to reiterate that the space was only booked after 4 p.m., which had nearly caused stepmother to throw a fit. Since all the decor was still at Nina's place, she called Laura to check if they had left anything with stepmother. Thankfully, my sister is both clever and familiar with stepmother's antics, so she drove to the venue the next day to inspect the boxes. She told me she was not even surprised by the contents but was still taken aback by stepmother's boldness. The boxes were filled with pink frilly decorations, many of which seemed to be the exact items stepmother had initially shown Laura and Nina. Signs, balloons, placemats, and everything else. Laura realized that stepmother's intention was to arrive early to set up her vision of the baby shower, essentially forcing us all into her version of a Barbie hell. She called Nina to figure out a plan. Neither of them could come at 4 p.m., making it almost certain that stepmother would get her way. The most obvious solution was to throw everything away, but Laura had a better idea. That night they called me and Jane and asked, "Hey, want to destroy a party in 2 hours?" Laura got home and invited SM to go to a salon with her, lying about having coupons. SM agreed and they planned on going right after SM was done preparing the baby shower at 4 p.m. The next day SM got to the venue, was done setting things up by 5 though, I'll admit the woman is fast, and quickly left to meet Laura at the salon. Once they were together, Laura texted Nina that the coast was clear. At that point, Jane, Nina and I went to the venue. Sure enough, SM had prepared her party. To make this shorter, I won't describe it, but I will say it was so pink it almost gave Jane nausea. For the next 2 hours, Laura distracted SM at the salon while the three of us quickly took down every piece of decor SM had put up and replaced it with the pizza party stuff. We set up the activities, made up the tables and put every pink item we found back in SM's boxes. It was actually really fun. We were done only minutes before the shower started. A handful of guests arrived before SM did, so I barely saw her all night. Laura told me that when they got there, SM's jaw dropped as she tried to make sense of what had happened to all her pink decor. My sister just smiled, whispered "nice try" in her ear, and went to help Luke customize a bodysuit. Overall, the baby shower was everything we'd hoped for. Our friends were there, people had fun, and we had a ton of pizza, so I didn't really care that SM spent the whole party literally sulking in the corner. Nina did catch her trying to put little pink bows on top of the cupcakes, but she quickly shut that down. I give Laura and Nina full credit for saving the day. SM's interest in our baby quickly died after that. She stopped wearing her Nana shirts, didn't come to see us at the hospital when he was born, and refused to even acknowledge that he was a boy until she met him weeks later. Up until we went NC, she was a very loose definition of the word grandmother. I couldn't be more grateful my son will never know her. Edit. The baby shower was at 7 p.m. because it was the only time that worked for everyone. That included the venue because it was booked for the morning and we needed time to set things up. Luke was the only small child there, all the others were at least 9. Most of the parents there left early on too. Also, though it wasn't child-free and we were prepared for everyone we'd invited, not everyone on the guest list was able to come. Update 4. The stepmother is out of our lives, and I believe it is for good. After being engaged for over 2 years, Jane and I finally got married last Saturday. We are still adjusting to calling each other husband and wife, but we are getting there. Fortunately, the wedding was amazing. The children had a great time, our extended families finally met, and we danced so much that I could barely stand the next day. Luke took his role as ring bearer very seriously and held my son's hand as they walked down the aisle. Apart from my aunt getting heavily intoxicated and needing to be escorted out in a wheelchair, which I anticipated, everything went according to plan. It has been 4 months since we obtained the restraining order against stepmother. Things have been mostly peaceful, and I wouldn't have it any other way, though completely quiet would be ideal, but we can't always get what we want. I never really worried about stepmother showing up at the wedding, especially after the restraining order. It is literally illegal for her to come near us, and we made it very clear that if she tried, we would call the police immediately. My friends still advised me to take safety measures, most of which I did. Stepmother did not show up, of course, but I firmly believe that any money spent on security is well worth it, so no regrets on that end. My stepbrother and I wished each other happy birthdays, and he also texted Jane on her birthday back in June. That is the only contact we have had during these months. He knows that the door is still open if he wants to apologize. My father has given up on trying to reach me. We have not spoken since April. He is still trying to talk to my sister for some reason, but she is ignoring him. A few days after she went no contact with him, they had a huge fight over the phone about stepmother's treatment of us over the years. Insults were exchanged, sensitive topics were brought up, and most importantly, my father took stepmother's side on almost everything. My sister called me crying afterward. I wanted to call him and yell at him, but she told me not to. She is doing okay now. She has not blocked him but does not take his calls or answer his texts. She has only received 3. A weak apology, one on my birthday back in May, and a long rant after neither of us wished him a happy Father's Day. After all, despite our differences, he's still our father. He's not wrong. I love my father, and I always will. But I can't be around him anymore. While I've closed that door, I'm not locking it just yet. He knows what he needs to do if he wants his family back. I don't think he'll do it, but if there's the slightest chance he might, I'll consider opening the door an inch or two. This is my wife's suggestion. I'm a lot less optimistic than she is, but maybe it's important to hold on to that hope. She hasn't forgiven him though, or SM. Jane has always been very protective of Luke, so it was no surprise that this disaster shook her. A part of me was scared she'd blame me, but she called me a dumbass when I told her that. I've been in therapy for a few months and it's helped a lot more than I thought it would. I've realized SM's behavior around me growing up was a lot worse than I always thought, and it's great to finally be able to get my feelings off my chest. Right now, I'm more than happy. I just married the most amazing woman ever, and I have the family I always dreamed of. None of us are perfect, but I never thought life would be this great to me. I'll stick around Reddit, it's a lot more than I expected, but I can sleep peacefully now, so it's safe to say this will be my last update on this. Thank you all for the kindness and advice you gave me these months. I could have never expected the support I got from you guys, and I can't begin to describe how helpful it was. Seriously, thank you all. Edit. Okay. I updated too soon. I didn't want to write another post, so I'll just add this here. My stepbrother called me earlier today. Apparently he and SM had a fight, and he wants to meet up. I agreed as long as it was just the two of us. We're meeting up for coffee on Wednesday. I have no idea what to expect, but even if he does apologize, I need to know he understands how and why he let us down. Edit 2. I rescheduled the meetup with my stepbrother. With Jane and I leaving for our honeymoon on Friday, I decided that regardless of how the conversation with him went, I did not want to spend the entire trip thinking about it. He understood, and we agreed to talk when I returned. Final update. Stepmother and stepbrother. Hello everyone, I have been away from Reddit for a few months due to work, but many people have been messaging me about my stepbrother, so I want to provide a brief update. I have been quite busy and tired lately, so I might miss some details. Feel free to ask me anything. I first met my stepbrother for coffee back in August. He had a fight with stepmother, and the restraining order came up. She had lied to him about several details, accusing Luke of bullying my baby, bad-mouthing Jane, and more. However, this time he managed to get her to tell him the truth. After talking to his therapist and friends, and reflecting on his upbringing, my stepbrother started to re-evaluate his relationship with his mother. He finally accepted that I was not exaggerating about what she did to Luke. He wanted to talk to me back in June but did not want to distract Jane and me from the wedding. Over the past 4 months my stepbrother and I have been working on rebuilding our relationship. We have been meeting for coffee or lunch and discussing his mother, her impact on our lives, and her treatment of my children. Jane started joining us in October, and the kids saw him again for the first time 2 weeks ago. Things were awkward between us for a while but we are in a good place now. He is also making amends with my sister. In early November, he completely cut contact with stepmother. Jane and the kids are doing amazing. Luke turned 5 in September and our baby will be 2 in early February. We're spending the holidays with Jane's family in Brazil, while my stepbrother stays with his girlfriend. Things are great. That's all. I'm signing off for now. I'll let you know if anything happens. Happy holidays everyone. Best wishes to all of you. Now, on to the next story, Story 4. My wife slept with her ex and demanded half of my assets, so I disappeared without a trace and found the love of my life. Before I start, I must clarify that I suspect this story might be fictional. Nevertheless, it is quite intriguing, so I recommend giving it a read. Initially, I thought my day could not get any worse, but I was wrong. The entire week at work had been awful, and to make matters worse, my boss, who is also the company president, called me into his office to reprimand me for a mistake that someone else had made. The day after I posted this story, I found out that it was actually written by a writer. When I arrived home, I found my sister-in-law's car blocking my driveway, which meant I could not park in front of my house. The street was filled with parked cars belonging to the neighbor's teenage son and his friends, forcing me to park 3 doors down. As I entered the house, I questioned why I even bothered. My relationship with my wife's sister, Susan, had always been strained since the day we met. I could never understand why, but she seemed to have an immediate dislike for me. Additionally, I had little hope for an intimate evening with my wife Janice, as we had not been intimate for almost a month despite my persistent efforts. When I arrived at my driveway, I noticed an empty garbage can by the curb. I dragged it around the side of the house through the side gate and placed it next to the back door. Upon entering the kitchen, I heard music and the chatter of my wife and her sister in the living room. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, took a sip and headed towards the living room. However, a sentence I overheard at the door stopped me in my tracks. "God, he ducked me 3 times today," was not spoken by my sister-in-law, but by my beloved wife. "Ever since Brandon came back last month, I just can't get enough of him," my wife admitted. Brandon was my wife's ex-boyfriend who had left her and moved away. Curious, my wife's sister asked, "So what are you going to do now?" Janice replied, "Brandon wants me to move in with him, so I'll get a lawyer and file for divorce. This is a community property state, so I'll get half of everything." I'd had enough of hearing. I stumbled to the rear door and walked back to my car in a haze. The truth struck me as soon as I opened the door and got into the driver's seat. My wife was having an extramarital affair and now she wanted half of everything we had. The worst aspect was that she had a good chance of getting what she wanted from the state. Janice and I had tied the knot just 3 years ago. She had quit her job right after our wedding, and at home, she never lifted a finger. I hired a maid 3 times a week to handle the house cleaning and laundry, and on those days, she would cook dinner. The rest of the time, either I cooked or she ordered takeout. I know what you might be thinking, but love blinded me. She kept me satisfied by providing good sex, at least until a month ago. When I was 13, my mother passed away, a devastating loss for both my father and me. My dad did his best to raise me right and we became very close. Losing him to a drunk driver when I was 23 was another significant blow, occurring just a year before I met Janice. I inherited nearly $2.5 million from my father and wisely kept the money invested with the guidance of a good broker. Despite Janice's attempts to spend every dime I earned, I had saved hundreds of thousands more. I never touched the inheritance, allowing it to grow even in the current economy. I had enough to live comfortably without needing to spend it. My love for Janice led us to skip a prenuptial agreement, a foolish mistake many make, thinking their marriage will last forever. This oversight meant she could potentially take almost $1.5 million from me, all for the privilege of sharing her bed with someone else. The state seemed all too willing to support this legalized form of exploitation. She had mentioned getting a lawyer, which indicated she wasn't yet prepared to serve me with divorce papers. Realizing I had some time to act, I formulated a plan while sitting in my car, keeping an eye on the rearview mirror until I saw my sister-in-law's car pull out and drive away. I then started the car, made a U-turn and walked back to my driveway. Upon entering the house, I noticed Janice was nowhere to be seen, so I headed to the kitchen for another beer, popping the top and taking a long sip as I contemplated my next steps. "Oh, there you are, honey," Janice greeted as she entered the kitchen. "I didn't hear you come in." "Hello, dear. I just got in. Been a long day," I replied with a loving smile, determined to play my role as convincingly as she did. "I didn't have time to order anything for dinner," she said with a slight pout. Even though I wanted to accuse her of spending the day with her boyfriend and sharing all the details with her sister, I held back. Instead I said, "That's okay, sweetie. I'll just heat up some leftovers from last night." She gave me a sweet smile, kissed my cheek and announced she was going to soak in a hot bath. Smiling and nodding, I thought to myself, yeah, gotta wash all that away. After she left, I grabbed a plate of cold fried rice and downed 2 more beers. Once I finished eating, I tossed the empty container and retreated to the den, settling into a chair and channel surfing until I found an old movie to watch. About half an hour later, Janice returned and sat on the couch until the movie ended. She then stood up, claimed she was tired and said she was heading to bed. As I watched her head upstairs, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and frustration. Despite my suspicions and the hurt I felt, I knew I had to bide my time and stick to my plan. I stayed up a while longer, nursing another beer, trying to focus on the movie but finding it difficult with my thoughts racing. Eventually, I turned off the TV and made my way to bed, determined to get through the next few days and execute my plan without tipping her off. The weekend passed with me working in the yard and playing golf with friends, maintaining a facade of normalcy while internally preparing for what was to come. Tired from being unfaithful, I thought. I told her I would watch the news and join her later. My mind was too occupied with plotting my next move to focus on the movie. Knowing I couldn't do much until Monday, I endured the weekend by working in the yard on Saturday and playing golf with friends on Sunday. On Monday, I contacted my broker who managed my inheritance portfolio and instructed him to liquidate everything. My position in upper management allowed me to swiftly cash in my 401k, penalties be damned. By Thursday, I was ready to execute my plan. Upon returning home to my supposedly loving wife, I fabricated an emergency situation at work, explaining that I needed to fly out for a week on company business. I packed 2 suitcases, which was all I needed. When we moved into the house, I had stored everything important to me, none of which matched her taste. Therefore, I had no desire for any of the furnishings, which were her choices. The silver lining was that we were renting the house, so I had no financial investment tied up in it. Having recently sold my condo, we were in the process of finding a new home that met her exacting standards. So far, none of the houses we had viewed seemed to satisfy her criteria. On Friday morning, I kissed my wife on the cheek one last time and carried my suitcases out the door. Loading them into my Lexus, I drove away without a single backward glance. My first stop was at the home of an old friend, Jake, whom I trusted implicitly. He was astonished when I proposed trading titles for his older but rebuilt 4-wheel drive vehicle, confiding in him about my situation. An hour later, I headed west. I doubted anyone would connect me to this vehicle, and Jake promised to keep the car I traded him hidden in his garage for a while. For the next 4 days, I made all purchases in cash. I had canceled all our credit cards to avoid leaving any traceable records. Most of my money was securely stashed in an offshore account, thanks to my broker, who also arranged for fund transfers whenever necessary. I kept enough cash hidden in the SUV to sustain me for a while. The nights spent alone in motels were the hardest. Over the past week, I had been so focused on executing my plan that I hadn't taken time to process what had happened to me personally. I had genuinely loved Janice. Otherwise, I wouldn't have married her. I went through various what-if scenarios in my mind but realized there was little I could have done differently. Even if I had known her old boyfriend had come back, I doubted I could have kept them apart. I concluded that she probably never truly loved me and it was my fault for being naive enough to marry her. On the 5th day away from home, I found myself in a mom-and-pop diner in a small town in Montana. I wondered what my supposedly loving wife was doing, as she must have discovered by now that all her credit cards were canceled and our bank account was empty. My thoughts were interrupted by an older couple at the next table, whose quiet conversation I couldn't help but overhear. The man, who seemed to be in his late 50s, was discussing with his red-haired wife the need for an extra hand on their farm. Unfortunately, they couldn't afford to hire anyone until their current calves were ready for the market. Even then, finding someone willing to work for what they could pay was a challenge. After finishing my meal, I stood up and approached their table, apologizing for overhearing but suggesting I might be able to help them. The older man scrutinized me, trying to size me up. "I don't see how you could help us. If you heard what we were talking about, you know we can't pay you anything," he said, his tone cautious. "What if I just need a place to stay in exchange for my labor?" I proposed, trying to sound as earnest as possible. His eyes narrowed and he turned to his wife. "Colleen, excuse us for a moment while I speak to this young man outside." He stood up, waiting for me to follow. Once we were in the parking lot, away from prying ears, he turned to face me. I took the opportunity to size him up. He was about my height, 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, rugged build. His once dark hair had turned mostly gray, and his face bore the lines of years spent working outdoors under the harsh sun. "Who the hell are you? Are you part of that Wilson ranch?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. I could tell he was wary, and his question was loaded with mistrust. The way he mentioned the Wilson ranch made it clear he had no fondness for them. It was crucial that I make him understand I wasn't a threat and that I genuinely needed a fresh start. I raised my hands defensively and said, "Hold on there, mister. I don't know anything about Wilson. 4 days ago, I was living in Texas and I just arrived here this morning. I thought maybe we could help each other out." He replied, "If what you say is true, why would you want to help us out? I can't afford to pay you. What's in it for you? If you're on the run from the law, we don't need that kind of trouble." I said, "I'm probably on the run, as you put it, but not like you may think." I then shared my story about my unfaithful wife who was trying to take me for everything I had, explaining that I just needed a place to stay for a while. "I haven't robbed or killed anybody. I'm just trying to keep what's rightfully mine. If you have a place I could stay, I'll repay you with my labor. I'll cover my own expenses, and if you don't think I'm any help, just tell me, and I'll leave without any hard feelings." He studied my face thoughtfully and said that if I was being truthful, he would be foolish not to at least give me a chance. However, he warned me up front that the Wilsons were pressuring him to sell his land to them. They hadn't done anything shady yet, but he wouldn't put it past them and I might be getting into more than I could handle. I told him that I was willing to take that risk. He then asked about my ranching experience. I admitted honestly that I had spent a few summers on my uncle's ranch in Texas, but I wasn't a seasoned cowboy. He extended his hand and we sealed our agreement with a handshake. He suggested I call him Bill and I introduced myself as Carson. Together, we walked back into the diner where Colleen was waiting. Bill called out to her, "Colleen, this is Carson. He'll be working for us if he can handle it." Colleen stood and extended her hand. I shook it and she greeted me warmly, saying it was very nice to meet me. Her voice had a clear tone with a hint of an Irish accent. Like her husband, she was trim and fit. I replied, "It's nice to meet you too, ma'am." She corrected me with a smile. "The last name is Buckman, but just call me Colleen. We don't have much use for formality in this part of the country." I instantly liked this gracious woman. Bill suggested we head back to the ranch, but before leaving town, he stopped at a general store. We both stepped out of our vehicles. Bill suggested that I should get some clothes appropriate for ranch work. As we entered the store, the owner greeted Bill warmly, clearly recognizing him as a regular customer. I purchased a coat and a pair of Western-style riding boots, which would be sufficient for a week. From the general store, it was approximately a 20-minute drive to the main gate of Rocking Bee Ranch, Bill's brand name, displayed prominently on an arch. We continued for another mile on a private road until we reached the main house, a well-maintained, freshly painted 2-story building perched on a rise. Behind it, I could see a barn and several outbuildings. The pickup truck was partly loaded with sacks of groceries, indicating their weekly supply trip into town. I parked behind them, gathered as many bags as I could carry, and followed the Buckmans into the kitchen. After 2 trips, we had unloaded the truck. Bill then directed me to drive around to the back of the house, where he showed me a small cabin where I would be staying. As I pulled around, I saw Bill standing in front of the cabin. When I got out, he pointed to it and mentioned that Sam, another ranch hand, used a similar cabin a few yards away. He added that Sam was currently out making his rounds and that I would meet him later. "I don't see how you could help us. If you heard what we were talking about, you know we can't pay you anything," he said, his tone cautious. "What if I just need a place to stay in exchange for my labor?" I proposed, trying to sound as earnest as possible. His eyes narrowed and he turned to his wife. "Colleen, excuse us for a moment while I speak to this young man outside." He stood up, waiting for me to follow. Once we were in the parking lot, away from prying ears, he turned to face me. I took the opportunity to size him up. He was about my height, 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, rugged build. His once dark hair had turned mostly gray, and his face bore the lines of years spent working outdoors under the harsh sun. "Who the hell are you? Are you part of that Wilson ranch?" he asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. I could tell he was wary, and his question was loaded with mistrust. The way he mentioned the Wilson ranch made it clear he had no fondness for them. It was crucial that I make him understand I wasn't a threat and that I genuinely needed a fresh start. I raised my hands defensively and said, "Hold on there, mister. I don't know anything about Wilson. 4 days ago, I was living in Texas and I just arrived here this morning. I thought maybe we could help each other out." He replied, "If what you say is true, why would you want to help us out? I can't afford to pay you. What's in it for you? If you're on the run from the law, we don't need that kind of trouble." I said, "I'm probably on the run, as you put it, but not like you may think." I then shared my story about my unfaithful wife who was trying to take me for everything I had, explaining that I just needed a place to stay for a while. "I haven't robbed or killed anybody. I'm just trying to keep what's rightfully mine. If you have a place I could stay, I'll repay you with my labor. I'll cover my own expenses, and if you don't think I'm any help, just tell me, and I'll leave without any hard feelings." He studied my face thoughtfully and said that if I was being truthful, he would be foolish not to at least give me a chance. However, he warned me up front that the Wilsons were pressuring him to sell his land to them. They hadn't done anything shady yet, but he wouldn't put it past them and I might be getting into more than I could handle. I told him that I was willing to take that risk. He then asked about my ranching experience. I admitted honestly that I had spent a few summers on my uncle's ranch in Texas, but I wasn't a seasoned cowboy. He extended his hand and we sealed our agreement with a handshake. He suggested I call him Bill and I introduced myself as Carson. Together, we walked back into the diner where Colleen was waiting. Bill called out to her, "Colleen, this is Carson. He'll be working for us if he can handle it." Colleen stood and extended her hand. I shook it and she greeted me warmly, saying it was very nice to meet me. Her voice had a clear tone with a hint of an Irish accent. Like her husband, she was trim and fit. I replied, "It's nice to meet you too, ma'am." She corrected me with a smile. "The last name is Buckman, but just call me Colleen. We don't have much use for formality in this part of the country." I instantly liked this gracious woman. Bill suggested we head back to the ranch, but before leaving town, he stopped at a general store. We both stepped out of our vehicles. Bill suggested that I should get some clothes appropriate for ranch work. As we entered the store, the owner greeted Bill warmly, clearly recognizing him as a regular customer. I purchased a coat and a pair of Western-style riding boots, which would be sufficient for a week. From the general store, it was approximately a 20-minute drive to the main gate of Rocking Bee Ranch, Bill's brand name, displayed prominently on an arch. We continued for another mile on a private road until we reached the main house, a well-maintained freshly painted 2-story building perched on a rise. Behind it, I could see a barn and several outbuildings. The pickup truck was partly loaded with sacks of groceries, indicating their weekly supply trip into town. I parked behind them, gathered as many bags as I could carry, and followed the Buckmans into the kitchen. After 2 trips, we had unloaded the truck. Bill then directed me to drive around to the back of the house, where he showed me a small cabin where I would be staying. As I pulled around, I saw Bill standing in front of the cabin. When I got out, he pointed to it and mentioned that Sam, another ranch hand, used a similar cabin a few yards away. He added that Sam was currently out making his rounds and that I would meet him later. I unloaded my bags and started settling into the cabin. It had a single large room with a bed along one wall, a table with 2 chairs, a potbelly wood stove in one corner, and a bathroom with a single stone shower. While it wasn't luxurious, it was clean and provided a suitable place to stay for now, offering me a temporary refuge where I could hopefully avoid being found by Janice. When I returned outside, Bill was sitting in his pickup and told me to hop in. He took me on a tour of the ranch, which spanned nearly 6,000 acres. Most of the land was used for grazing, with a couple of hundred acres set aside for growing winter feed. The back section of the ranch was hilly and covered in forest, leading up to mountains with a stream flowing through the property, accessible only on horseback. Bill explained that he used to employ 3 full-time hands, but tough times had left Sam as the only remaining worker. Sam had been with the ranch for nearly 30 years. During roundups, when they selected stock to take to market, they hired additional help. After the tour, Bill dropped me off at the small cabin. He mentioned that he had noticed I was carrying a laptop and informed me that there was a satellite connection with a router, allowing for wireless internet access. He also mentioned that supper was at the main house, typically around 6 p.m., before driving away. Within less than 30 minutes, I had settled into the cabin, giving me time to boot up my computer. As Bill had mentioned, I was able to connect wirelessly to the internet and quickly checked my emails. There was a message from Jake, stating that Janice had reported me missing to the police, who were now investigating my disappearance. This news gave me much to think about, as Jake was the only person I had told about my departure, and even he didn't know my destination. I had mailed my resignation to my former employer but had not informed them in person. Just before 6 p.m., I walked over to the main house and knocked on the door. Bill called for me to come in, and as I entered, I saw Colleen preparing food while Bill was talking to a man I assumed was Sam. Bill motioned for me to come over and introduced me to Sam, the seasoned ranch hand. "Sam, this is Carson, the new hand I mentioned. At least for today, we'll see how he feels about it tomorrow after a day's work," Bill said with a broad grin. "Carson, meet Sam," he added, completing the introduction. Sam greeted me with a warm smile and extended his hand. Standing at least 6'3". He was a large man who, like Bill, showed the signs of a life spent working hard. He appeared to be about the same age as Bill. Notably, he was African American. I shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. Sam said he hoped I would like it there and mentioned he could use the help. At 28, I was about half his age, so he viewed me as young. I assured him that I planned to give it my best effort. At that moment, Colleen called us to the table as supper was ready. Bill and his wife sat at opposite ends of the table, leaving Sam and me to sit between them, across from each other. The table was laden with a large platter of pork chops, a big bowl of mashed potatoes, another bowl of fresh green beans, and a plate stacked with homemade biscuits. Colleen mentioned that they didn't eat fancy, but there was plenty, and it was filling. I replied that it looked great. As we ate, I asked Bill if he had been on the ranch all his life. He confirmed that his grandfather had started the ranch and passed it on to his father, who then passed it on to him and Colleen. He admitted that when he was younger, he wasn't sure Colleen would be a part of it, as he had to fight off every man to win her over. He looked at his wife with deep affection, his eyes reflecting years of love and shared history. Colleen responded with a warm smile, saying that Bill was the only man she had ever had eyes for and that she had just needed to make sure he wanted her enough. She spoke with a tone that revealed the deep bond and understanding between them. Bill added with pride that his wife was responsible for the 3 happiest days of his life: the day she agreed to marry him, their wedding day, and the day she gave birth to their daughter, Caitlin. His voice softened with each mention, highlighting the importance of these moments in his life. I hadn't noticed any sign of a daughter, and Colleen must have caught my curious look. She explained that their daughter was currently away, finishing her doctorate in veterinary sciences at South Dakota State University. She mentioned that Caitlin had only been able to come home for the holidays and that they were eagerly awaiting her return in a couple of months. Bill added that having a vet in the family would be incredibly beneficial and help reduce some expenses related to the ranch's livestock. He seemed excited about the prospect, his eyes lighting up at the thought of his daughter coming back home with such valuable skills. After dinner, I tried to help clear the dishes, but Colleen insisted that it was her job and gently shooed me away. Bill informed me that breakfast was at 5:30 and work would start at 6 o'clock. As Sam and I were leaving, I noticed a copy of that day's New York Times on the counter, likely picked up by Bill in town. I asked if I could borrow the front page, and he agreed. Outside, I invited Bill into my cabin for a moment. Inside, I took out my digital camera and showed him how to use it. I asked him to take a close-up photo of me holding the front page of the newspaper. While he seemed curious, he didn't ask any questions. He did ask about an alarm clock, and I assured him I had one. He said he would see me in the morning and left. I downloaded the picture to my computer and drafted an email to the police in my former hometown, explaining that I was alive and well and had left town of my own free will. Using a national newspaper instead of a local one helped keep my location ambiguous. I sent the email to Jake, instructing him to use a local coffee shop with free internet access, since my work email was likely still active. I provided my password so he could forward the original email and picture to the police without leaving any traceable paths. This way, I hoped to avoid being listed on any FBI or national missing person lists. Assuming the police wouldn't devote extensive resources to search for a runaway husband, I slept soundly that night. The next morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock, showered, and dressed in time to walk with Sam to the main house. After we had breakfast, Bill instructed Sam to have me start replacing fence posts in the hilly section. We headed to the barn, where Sam showed me a horse and saddle I would need. He seemed satisfied with how I saddled the big brown mare, drawing on my experience from my uncle's ranch. We also took 2 mules, loading them with saddle packs for fence posts and a post hole digger. Bill joined us at the barn, carrying a Winchester Model 94 and a saddle scabbard, explaining it was mainly for the rare occasion when we might need to put down a sick cow. Mounted and leading a mule each, Sam and I set off, following the creek up into the hills. As we rode, we engaged in conversation, sharing our stories and getting to know each other. I confided in him about how I ended up in Montana, trusting his discretion. In return, he told me about his own life. He had married right after high school, only to find his ex-wife in bed with another man. In a fit of rage, he nearly beat the man to death, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence. Upon his release, Bill was the only person willing to give him a chance, and Sam had spent the last 30 years working on the ranch. He spoke highly of Bill and Colleen, considering them to be the salt of the earth. After about half an hour, we arrived at the fence marking the property boundaries. Sam pointed out that not all the posts needed replacing, only those that were rotted or close to it, approximately every third one. He stayed with me while I replaced the first 2 posts to ensure I was doing it correctly. He suggested working until around 4 o'clock, allowing me enough time to return, care for the horse and mules, and be ready for dinner at 6 o'clock. His parting advice was to follow the stream back down to avoid getting lost. He then headed back, leaving me to work on my own. I continued down the fence line, diligently replacing old posts with new ones. At noon I took a break, retrieving the pork chop sandwiches that Colleen had prepared for me from my saddlebag. After finishing my meal, I returned to work, my watch's alarm signaling 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By that time, I had replaced almost all the posts the mules had carried. Leading the mules, I followed the fence line back until I found the stream and began my descent. Just before exiting the trees, I came across a natural pool where the stream flowed in and out. I paused to admire the view, noting it as the most beautiful and tranquil spot on the ranch. Back at the barn, I unsaddled the animals and fed them in time. While I was tending to the horses, Sam entered to bed down his horse. We quickly washed up and changed before supper, where we enjoyed steaks. Exhausted, I contributed minimally to the conversation and excused myself right after dinner to head to bed. Sleep came swiftly and deeply. The next morning, I woke up feeling sore all over. My hands ached from using the post hole digger, and my arms, shoulders, and legs throbbed. Despite my regular workouts, a full day of setting fence posts proved to be far more demanding than a 2-hour gym session. Limping into the kitchen, I winced as I sat down, which elicited chuckles from Bill and Sam. Even Colleen couldn't completely hide her grin. Despite the soreness, I was ravenous and eagerly devoured my breakfast. As we finished eating and began to rise from the table, Bill asked if I was ready for another day of fencing. Though I groaned inwardly, I replied affirmatively, trying to sound more optimistic than I felt. Bill laughed and told me to take a break from fencing for the day. He said he would like me to ride the rounds with Sam. As we rose from the table, Bill asked, "Ready for another day of fencing?" I groaned but replied, "Yes, sir," trying to sound more optimistic than I felt. Bill laughed. "I think you can give it a rest today. I'd like you to ride the rounds with Sam." I nodded appreciatively. Our first task was to clean the stalls and replace the hay. After putting the horses and mules out to pasture and filling their feeder, we loaded up in the pickup and began our inspection of the ranch. Our main objective was to ensure no calves were down or separated from their mothers. Sam's knowledge of the ranch seemed almost instinctual, as he effortlessly anticipated where the cattle would be and roughly estimated their numbers. After 30 years of experience, it came naturally to him. As we reached the far end of the ranch, Sam stopped the truck and surveyed the surroundings. Something on one of the hills caught his attention, prompting him to hand me his binoculars and point to a specific spot. After a minute, I identified 2 calves seemingly alone. "Where are their mothers?" I asked. He gestured toward 2 cows near the tree line. "That's them over there. Their calves must have wandered into the trees, got lost and kept going. We'll have to bring them down." "Are we hiking up there?" I inquired. "Nah, it's too far. We'll go back and load up a couple of horses." The pickups were equipped with 2-way radios, and Sam called Bill, informing him of what we had seen and that we were on our way to get the horses. When we got back to the barn, Bill had already saddled 2 horses and loaded them into the trailer. All we had to do was grab our gear and head out. Sam drove us close to the tree line where the calves were and we unloaded the horses, riding up into the hills. It was clear from Sam's familiarity with the terrain that his 30 years on the ranch had made him an expert. After about half an hour, we quietly approached the calves and gently guided them back down the hills. I couldn't help but laugh when we emerged from the trees, and the calves saw their mothers. They sprinted toward them, bleating loudly, and immediately began to nurse. The larger cows stood calmly, letting their young feed. It was a touching scene, so different from my own upbringing. Dinner that evening was a hearty spread of fried chicken, corn on the cob, and mashed potatoes. Feeling more energized, I engaged more in conversation than the previous night and learned more about Colleen. Her parents had moved to the United States from Ireland when she was just 5 years old. Her father, captivated by stories of the Old West, had brought the family to Montana. This explained the faint Irish accent in her voice. Even though she grew up in America, she still carried the influence of her Irish heritage. Feeling much better the following day, I returned to the task of replacing fence posts. After breakfast, Sam assisted me in loading up the mules, but this time I ventured out alone. Following the stream made it easy to find my way to the worksite. Having picked up a few tricks to make the job less taxing, the day's work went more smoothly. By the time 4 o'clock rolled around, I had finished setting the last post and returned to the barn. With a bit of extra time, I took the opportunity to work on some of the stalls before heading in for dinner. On the 4th day, I helped Sam with the repairs to some of the buildings, and the following day I was back to setting more fence posts. The next 2 months seemed to pass in a blur. I found myself taking turns riding the ranch to check on the cattle, and I was in the best physical shape of my life. We had a schedule in place. Sam took Saturdays off, Bill took Sundays, and I had Mondays off. I used my day off to do laundry and run errands in town if necessary. I had developed a strong fondness for everyone on the ranch. Sam was easygoing and pleasant, and we often sat and chatted after supper. I held Bill in high regard. He was honest and hardworking, and we got along well. Colleen was very kind to Sam and me, but I could sense a certain fire in her. Together, she and Bill made a wonderful couple. Colleen and Bill were eagerly anticipating their daughter's return. At breakfast on Friday, Colleen mentioned that Caitlin would be coming home in a week. It was my turn that day to ride through the wooded section, checking for cattle that might have wandered into the hills. Shortly after 4 o'clock, I made my way to the stream, followed it down, and reached the pool below the waterfall. I dismounted, took off my shirt, and knelt by the water, dipping my bandana into the cool stream to wash away the sweat and dust. A horse's whinny from downstream caught my attention, and I looked over to see a rider approaching. At first, I thought it was Colleen, but quickly realized it was a younger version of her. This striking young woman could only be Caitlin, with her mother's crystal blue eyes and red hair. She rode up and halted a few feet away from me. As I stood and faced her, she asked in a frosty tone, "Who are you and what are you doing on this property?" I said, "The name's Carson, and I work here." "I don't believe you. My dad said he couldn't afford to pay another hand." Despite her beauty, I was getting a little aggravated at her unfriendly tone, and I said, "Yeah, I heard that too. I guess that's why I laugh all the way to the bank every payday." She gazed at me, reined her horse around, and gave it a kick in the sides. I chuckled to myself, put my shirt back on, remounted my horse and continued towards the barn. Later, I found out there had been a miscommunication between Caitlin and her parents. They thought she was coming home the next week. Instead, much to their surprise, she had arrived a couple of hours after I had ridden out. She had spent the morning and the early part of the afternoon with her parents until she expressed her desire to go for a ride, something she hadn't had time for in school but loved to do. So she saddled up and rode to her favorite spot, the waterfall and pool of water. I guess after 2 months, I was old news, and Bill and Colleen had forgotten to mention me. Just as I returned to the barn, I saw the back of the redhead disappear inside. I dismounted and proceeded to leave my horse inside. Caitlin must have been looking for her father and finally found him in the barn. I could clearly hear her loud voice as she asked, "Who is that man that was up at the waterfall?" Bill pondered for a moment before replying, "That must have been Carson." Caitlin added, "He said he works here, but last time I was here, you told me you couldn't afford to hire anyone else." Bill responded, "Well, he does work here. As for his pay, that's not really your concern. I'm still running this ranch, young lady." She stammered, "But he claimed you paid him so much that he laughed all the way to the bank." By then, I had entered the barn. She had her back to me and didn't notice, but Bill saw me. He grinned and said, "Is that true, Carson? If you think you're overpaid, I can fix that." She spun around and glared at me. I took off my hat with one hand and scratched the back of my head with the other and said, "Well, I'd hate to take advantage of you, Bill. How much are you thinking of cutting my wages?" Bill and I burst out laughing. She continued to glare at both of us, not finding it funny at all. "Sweetheart, just so you know, Carson gets to stay in the cabin next to Sam's," Bill explained. Caitlin retorted, "And what else?" Bill replied, "That, and he gets to enjoy your mother's fine cooking." Caitlin pressed on, "So you're saying you aren't paying him? Why would he work for nothing?" Bill responded, He has his reasons, and it's not my place to tell you. I chimed in, working for a chance to taste your mother's cooking is worth a lot. I'm sure she wouldn't appreciate hearing you say it's nothing. She shot me another glare and stormed out of the barn. Bill shook his head and said, she reminds me so much of her mother when she was young. I never thought I would tame Colleen. At supper that night, Caitlin joined us. She sat next to Sam, opposite me at the table. She gave me another sharp look when I entered the kitchen. I waited until everyone had filled their plates before speaking. In a pleasant tone I said, your mother mentioned that you've completed your doctorate in veterinary medicine. Yeah, was her curt reply. During the rest of the meal, Caitlin spoke mostly with her parents and Sam, who had been a part of the ranch since before she was born. She didn't address me directly, and I kept quiet for the most part, understanding that this was her homecoming and her family wanted to catch up on her life while she was away. Once I finished eating, I excused myself and went back to my cabin. Checking my email, I saw a message from Jake. He had talked to a friend in the police force who confirmed that they no longer considered me a missing person after receiving the email with my photo. It seemed like Brandon had broken up with Janice when he realized I had taken all the money with me. Janice was working as a waitress and living in a city apartment since she couldn't pay the rent on our property. She was too poor to pay a lawyer to come after me. It was funny because her boyfriend had also desired her for my money, which was the reason she had married me. Even though I was only replacing the fence posts every third or fourth day, I kept working on them. Now that I was out of the hills, I could drive the pickup to my place of employment, and loading the posts into the truck instead of the mules was a lot simpler. The morning after Caitlin returned home, I loaded the pickup with posts and drove to where I had last left off. When lunchtime came around, I walked to the truck and realized I had forgotten my lunch. Normally, Colleen would make sure we had lunch if we were working away from the main house, but I had spaced out and didn't pick mine up. I could have driven back to the house but decided that missing one meal wouldn't kill me. About half an hour later, as I was setting a post and attaching the wire, I heard a vehicle approaching. Turning around, I saw one of the ranch trucks coming to a stop just as I finished with the post. To my surprise, Caitlin stepped out, carrying a small sack that looked like the ones Colleen used for our lunches. Mama said you forgot your lunch, Caitlin announced, thrusting the bag towards me. I accepted it and replied, thank you, Caitlin. That was very considerate of you. Peering inside the bag, I saw the usual 2 sandwiches. I took one out and offered her the other, but she declined with a shake of her head. Shrugging, I walked over to the tailgate of the truck to eat. Caitlin followed and stood about 5 feet away, just watching me. I focused on my food, keeping my gaze straight ahead. Why are you here? She eventually asked. I turned to look at her, deciding to tease her a bit. You have to keep this a secret, I said. I robbed a bank and stashed the money. I'm laying low here until things cool down and I can retrieve the cash. Her eyes widened momentarily before she glared at me. You're a real clown, she snapped, turning to walk away. I waited until she was halfway to her truck before calling out her name. She paused and slowly turned back to face me. I married a woman who never loved me, who was only interested in what I could provide for her, I confessed. I ended up here because I needed to escape from everything I knew for a while. She looked at me intently, and I could tell she believed me this time. Without saying another word, she nodded and walked away. As she drove off, I remembered what her dad had said about her mother being similarly spirited at her age. He mentioned taming her, but I suspected their mutual love was the real secret. It had been less than a day since I first met Caitlin, and I couldn't envision anyone taming her fiery spirit. That night's supper was much like the previous one. Caitlin engaged in conversations with her parents and Sam. I didn't feel left out, understanding she barely knew me, and we had no shared history. As we were finishing dinner, there was a knock on the door, and Bill went to answer it. He returned with a man about my age, who could be described as tall, dark, and handsome. Caitlin called out his name excitedly, jumped up and hugged him. It was clear they were well acquainted and happy to see each other. A few minutes later, another knock came, and Bill brought in another man. This one was fair-haired and equally handsome. He received an equally warm welcome from Caitlin. Bill's words about having to fend off all the men to win his wife came to mind. Caitlin, with her striking looks, was every bit the prize her mother had been. I excused myself from the table and retreated to my cabin. Mentally, I wished the 2 new arrivals luck. I envied them, knowing that if Caitlin turned out to be anything like her mother, the man who won her heart would be incredibly fortunate. The next day, I took the pickup and rode the ranch. By the time I had made my rounds, something didn't seem to add up. It was early enough that I went back and got Sam and we did a whirlwind tour of the ranch. There were a lot of cattle scattered over the ranch, but he agreed that something didn't feel right. It just seemed like we were short a few herds. We decided we would saddle up the next day and ride the hilly areas. We discussed it with Bill that night at supper, and he agreed to our plan. It rained that night, which would make finding tracks more difficult. The next morning, we loaded our horses into a trailer, and Bill drove us to one end of the property. I rode about a third of the way up into the tree line, and Sam rode another third higher. We then headed across the ranch, over the hills, and through the trees. It took a big part of the day to reach the far side. We counted 5 stray herds. Bill met us as we came out of the hills, and we loaded the horses in the trailer and headed back. We discussed the situation and decided the only thing we could do is be more vigilant. At dinner that night, Caitlin had another suitor call on her. I heard her mother mutter something about that being the third one that day. The word had gotten out that she was back home, and guys were crawling out of the woodwork seeking her attention. The next 4 days, we spent a lot of time keeping an eye on the herd. Everything seemed to be okay, except for the suspected original loss. Caitlin's suitors continued to visit. She had been home for a week and hadn't said 2 words to me since the day she brought me my lunch. The 5th day after the perceived disappearance of the cattle, I told Bill I wanted to ride the property line through the hills. We had already covered the fence lines along the pasture areas and had seen no evidence that the missing cattle had taken through there. Sam dropped me off on the west side of the ranch. This was where Bill's ranch bordered the Wilson ranch. About halfway to the southwest corner, I spotted 3 fresh sets of horse tracks. They crossed from the Wilson side of the fence onto Bill's side. The puzzling thing is that the fence wire was still up. I dismounted and checked the fence posts and saw that the staples had been loosened on 5 posts and were barely holding the wire up. Remove the staples and lower the wire, and you could cross over. Put the wire and staples back, and it looked normal. I remounted and followed the tracks. As I approached the stream, I noticed 3 horses tied to a tree slightly above the waterfall. I was still about 30 yards away, so I quickly dismounted, tied my horse to a tree and grabbed the rifle from its scabbard. When I reached the horses, I saw boot prints leading downstream. Cautiously, I crept to the edge of the waterfall and peered over, gasping at the sight before me. Caitlin was in the pool, completely naked. Her body glistened in the clear water, and I couldn't help but be mesmerized by her beauty. Suddenly, movement in the trees to her right snapped me back to reality. I quickly scanned the area and spotted 1 man to the right and 2 more approaching the pond from the left. I raised my rifle and fired, the bullet striking near the feet of the man on the right. Another quick pull of the trigger sent dirt exploding close to the 2 men on the left. Caitlin let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. I stood up, making sure everyone could see me, and yelled, "On your bellies now, I won't miss the next shot." "Caitlin, stay where you are." She didn't see the 3 men, only me standing over her with a rifle. She struggled to cover her body. One of the men on the left flinched as if he was going to run, but a shot to the bark on the tree next to him convinced him to drop flat. Caitlin looked towards where I had shot and finally saw the 2 men, shrieking again. I started to count down, and before I could say 1, the other 2 men dropped to the ground. I instructed them to put their hands behind their heads and they complied. I quickly told Caitlin to get out and get dressed. She tried to protest, but I growled at her to just follow my orders, get dressed and leave. Clearly terrified and shaking, she did as I instructed. She walked out of the pool like Venus rising from the sea, her back to me, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. The sight of her alabaster skin and perfectly rounded butt was forever etched into my memory. She hurriedly put on her jeans and shirt, mounted her horse, and with a swift kick, disappeared through the trees. When she was gone, I ordered the men to get on their bellies and stay down. Once all 3 were lying before me, I felt a wave of relief. It was time for a bluff. "So what am I going to do with you 3? I could just shoot you in the legs and watch you bleed to death." The men began to beg for mercy. I continued. "Even if I spare you, Caitlin's father will make sure you face justice when I tell him what you intended to do to his daughter. Unless, of course, you have a more compelling confession for the sheriff. Something like cattle rustling. It may lead to jail time, but at least it guarantees you a chance at life." The smallest of the group broke down. "Yes, we did it," Wilson said. Breaking Buckman would secure his land. His colleague tried to hush him, but he snapped back, "I ain't dying for no damn cows." Knowing Caitlin would return quickly and her father would soon arrive to investigate, I needed to buy some time. Sure enough, 45 minutes later, Bill and Sam galloped into view. I signaled them down, and they rushed up to join me at the top of the rise. "What in the hell is going on here?" Bill demanded, his eyes darting between the 3 men on the ground and me. "It looks like we have some of Wilson's men sneaking around," I replied, keeping my rifle trained on them. I tracked them from the fence line and caught them trying to sneak up on Caitlin while she was swimming. I nudged the smaller man with the barrel of my rifle. "This one has something he wants to tell you." The man whimpered under the pressure. "We did it, we took some of your cattle, but it was Wilson who made us do it." Bill pushed his hat back and exchanged a knowing look with Sam. "You know, back in my grandfather's day, horse thieves and cattle rustlers would have been strung up without a second thought. Justice seemed a lot simpler back then. Too bad we have to be civilized now." While Sam stood guard, Bill and I decided to march the rustlers back down. With rifles in hand, we trailed behind them, Sam tethering their horses together and bringing up the rear. When we reached the buildings, we led the rustlers into the barn, placing them in separate stalls with open doors so we could watch them without them seeing each other. Bill went into the house to call the sheriff, while Sam and I stood guard. In less than 30 minutes, the sheriff arrived, driving up the mile-long drive. Bill met him and explained the situation. I suggested we bring out the smaller culprit first for questioning, and the sheriff agreed. I had the prisoner outside in no time. Initially hesitant, the little rustler reconsidered his silence and began to talk. The sheriff looked at Bill and said, "Seems like we've got a straightforward case of trespassing here. Honestly, it's a bit of a waste of my time, but I could leave them in your hands and forget I saw them. I'll let you handle things." The frightened rustler's eyes widened, and he suddenly opened up. The sheriff soon got the truth out of him and called for backup. Soon, a convoy of sheriff vehicles was heading to Wilson's expansive ranch. Despite its size, the sheriff pinpointed the location provided by the rustler, discovering almost 100 stolen cattle bearing the Rocking Bee brand. By the end of the day, Wilson and his accomplices were behind bars. Amidst all the commotion, it was well past 9 o'clock before we sat down for supper. Caitlin, though seated at the table, kept her eyes fixed on her plate. "What were you doing out there?" Bill asked her, finally getting a chance to speak with her. "I was just taking a swim. I didn't think anyone would come spy on me," Caitlin said, casting an accusing glare my way. I interjected, "Firstly, Caitlin, I wasn't spying on you. I followed their horse tracks to the stream. Secondly, consider what might have happened if I hadn't been there. I doubt those three were planning a picnic when they saw you swimming naked." Colleen added, "Thank goodness you arrived when you did, Carson. I hate to think what might have happened." The conversation shifted and we hurriedly finished our meal, knowing we had an early start the next day. As I exited the kitchen and headed toward my cabin, Caitlin called out to me. I stopped and waited as she snapped, "So did you enjoy the view today?" Expecting gratitude proved too optimistic, so I answered, "Let's just say I'd be dishonest if I claimed it wasn't breathtaking." She huffed and turned on her heels, marching off toward the house. I stood shaking my head, acknowledging there was something about me that consistently hooked her. The following day, Bill had to head into town to officially file charges against Wilson. Returning the stolen cattle to their rightful place would take several days, as the prosecutor needed to thoroughly document the case first. Sam and I spent the day refreshing the paint on some of the outbuildings. We had lunch in the kitchen, but Caitlin chose not to join us. I decided that suited me just fine. Bill returned in the early afternoon but waited until dinner to share the developments. He explained that since this wasn't a capital case, Wilson and his accomplices would be released on bail. While he didn't anticipate any further trouble, he cautioned us to remain vigilant. He glanced at his daughter, grinned mischievously, and said, "If you're planning on another nude swim anytime soon, maybe you should take Carson along for protection." Her face turned crimson again, and she sputtered as she stood and raced to her room. Bill and Sam erupted in laughter, and even Colleen couldn't help but giggle. I chuckled along with them. After the laughter subsided, we resumed our meal. Bill continued his good-natured teasing, "I really want to thank you, Carson. Wilson could have seriously jeopardized this ranch financially. You're worth every penny." We all shared another round of laughter. 3 days later, Bill received the news that he could retrieve his cattle. We loaded 3 horses into a trailer and drove to Wilson's Flying D Ranch, accompanied by a sheriff's escort. Colleen came along to drive the truck and trailer back once we unloaded the horses. Bill, Sam and I started pushing the cows back toward his ranch. As we approached the Rocking Bee Ranch, I rode ahead and loosened part of the fence line, allowing the cattle to cross over. After ensuring all the cattle were back to where they belonged, we secured the fencing and rode back to the main house, satisfied with the day's work. Caitlin, during this time, had applied for her veterinarian license. As the approval process typically took around 45 days, she could only tend to the animals on her father's ranch for now. I'd spot her around the property and, of course, at mealtimes. Despite her continued silent treatment, if I managed to catch her eye, I'd offer a big grin and wiggle my eyebrows, always enough to make her blush. 2 weeks after the waterfall incident, we found ourselves in the barn simultaneously, and I asked, "Been enjoying any swims lately?" She approached, standing inches away, and shot me a glare. "Why are you such an a-hole?" I shrugged, grinned, and said, "Why are you such a batch?" Her right hand aimed for my face, but I reacted swiftly, grabbing her wrist before she could strike. Undeterred, she tried with her left, yet I caught that too. I pushed both hands behind her back, pinning them and forcing her body against mine. Slowly, I lowered my face toward hers. She stared at me but made no effort to break free. I then said, "If you were mine, I'd put you over my knee and spank your butt." Attempting to pull back, she replied, "You wouldn't dare." Suddenly, I released my hold and she tumbled backward, landing on her butt. It's not that I wouldn't dare, I just got rid of one woman who doesn't care about me and I'm not wasting my time on another one. Traditionally, she was the one to storm off, but this time it was my turn. I left the barn, leaving her sitting on the ground. I didn't encounter her again until supper. Predictably, she didn't speak to me, but I couldn't decipher the look she gave me. Not that I ever claimed to understand women anyway. My marriage to Janice proved that. The following day, I was in the barn tending to the stalls when Bill walked in. Knowing it was his day off on Sunday, I figured he wanted to talk. I wondered if Caitlin had informed him of the previous day's incident and if he had come to ask me to leave. I stopped my work as he approached. Then he said, "I heard you and Caitlin had a little showdown yesterday." Well, that answered my question of whether Caitlin had confided in her father, but I noticed a twinkle in his eyes, and I said, "Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Probably my fault." He continued, "Maybe, maybe not. I think her issue is she doesn't know what to make of you. First, she thought you were here for something, then you became the hero who saved her and the ranch. What she can't figure out is why you aren't chasing after her like the other local young men. Like her mother at her age, Caitlin is used to having boys wrapped around her little finger. She's had a few boyfriends, but none lasted. I didn't think she really respected them. I just hope you don't let her chase you off. In my book, you're welcome here as long as you want." I said, "Thanks, Bill. That means a lot to me. For Caitlin, I'll quit teasing her and hopefully can live and let live." He left the barn, and I resumed my work. I had the rest of the day to ponder Bill's words. If Caitlin wanted to understand me, acting civilly and having a conversation would be more effective than her current approach. As for pursuing her like the others, that simply wasn't in the cards. She didn't join us for supper that night, a topic no one broached, and I didn't inquire. The following day, I stuck to my routine, waking up at 5 o'clock as usual, even on my day off. After breakfast, when Sam and Bill left for work, I retrieved my laundry. Bill had invested in a large commercial washer and dryer, making it possible for me to wash all my clothes in a single load. The laundry room was adjacent to the kitchen, so while my clothes washed, I sat at the kitchen table, eating and chatting with Colleen. Caitlin entered, an uncommon occurrence for breakfast, usually opting to eat later. Colleen asked about my plans for the day, and I told her I was thinking of driving into town. I then asked if there was anything she wanted me to pick up for her. She said if I wouldn't mind, there were a couple of things I could get for her. I assured her I wouldn't mind at all. Just then, Caitlin interjected, "Cool. I'll ride into town with you." I was planning to go to the general store for a few things, and it seems like a waste of gas for both of us to drive separately. I looked up, surprised, and responded, "Sure, I'd be happy to give you a lift." After our encounter yesterday, I hadn't expected her to talk to me, let alone want to travel together. I mentioned, "I'll be leaving in about an hour and a half, once my laundry is done and put away." She assured me she'd be ready. She finished preparing something to eat and quietly joined us at the table while Colleen and I continued our conversation. Later, as I stepped out of my cabin, she emerged from the back door, looking stunning in a turquoise sundress that highlighted her red hair. It was clear she wanted me to notice her. I held the passenger side door open for her and watched as she slid into the car. As we set off, she remained silent for the first half of the trip, observing the countryside. Then she suddenly said, "I thought you were going to kiss me yesterday." I glanced over, but she was looking out the side window, so I couldn't see her face. I replied, "Well, while that may not have been unpleasant, I have a rule about not forcing unwanted affections on unreceptive women." I noticed her head turn sharply, indicating she was staring at me. Though she remained silent, I could feel her occasional glances. We arrived at the general store, where I picked up some new jeans and shirts, while she gathered the items her mother needed. After an hour, we had everything loaded. With one more stop at the hardware store for Bill, I suggested we grab lunch first, and she agreed. We went to the same diner where I had first met Bill and Colleen. Sitting across from each other, we ordered our food but sat in silence. I began to regret not going straight to the hardware store. Then the door opened and 3 guys walked in. I recognized 2 of them from the group that had visited Caitlin. They approached our table, 2 sitting beside her while the 3rd stood behind me. Ignoring me, they started talking to her. I stood up, gestured for the 3rd guy to take my seat and moved to the next table. When the waitress brought our food, I had her place my meal in front of me. I ate quickly, ignoring their conversation. After tossing some bills on the table to cover our meals, I stood up. Caitlin's plate remained untouched, her food barely touched. I'll head over to the hardware store now. I can check back here later to see if you're ready to leave, I interjected into their conversation. She pushed her plate away, stood up and said, "It was nice seeing you all again, but we need to go." The men at the table tried to persuade her to stay, with one even offering to give her a ride home. She refused and followed me out to my SUV. As we drove to the hardware store, she remained in the car, visibly upset. The tension was palpable as we made our way back to the ranch. When we turned off the highway onto the long driveway, she finally spoke up. "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" I asked, confused about what she meant. "Moving to the other table?" she clarified. "Oh, that. I thought you'd rather spend time with your friends. Plus, I didn't want to be caught in the middle of their competition for your attention." "You really are an a-hole," she snapped. I wisely kept quiet, not wanting to provoke her while I was driving. When we arrived at the main house, she immediately grabbed what she could carry as soon as I opened the back of the SUV. I picked up more bags and followed her into the house. As I walked through the back door, she dumped everything onto the kitchen table without saying a word to her mother, then headed straight to her room. Colleen gave me a puzzled look. I shrugged and said, "I guess I'm an a-hole." Colleen laughed and approached me, placing a hand on my arm. "I've never seen anyone affect Caitlin the way you do." "I guess I was just born to annoy her," I replied. "I'm not so sure about that," she said, leaving me confused. I went back to my cabin and put away my new clothes. Not wanting to stay indoors, I went to the barn and saddled a horse. I rode to the top of the waterfall. Since the weather was pleasant, I tied the horse to a tree and sat at the edge of the falls, gazing at the tranquil pool below. After sitting there for about half an hour, maybe longer, Caitlin arrived on horseback. Not wanting to be accused of spying if she decided to skinny dip again, I threw a stone into the water to make a splash. She looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and eventually saw me. Expecting her to leave, I was surprised when she mounted her horse again and rode up to where I was. She tied her horse next to mine and walked towards me. I stood up and took a few steps back from the edge, just in case she had any plans to push me off. "You're an a-hole," she said, stopping inches from me. "And you're still a batch," I said. I didn't wait for her slap this time. I wrapped my arm around her waist and kissed her. As I pulled away, attempting to move towards my horse, she grabbed my arm and turned me back. To my surprise, she reached behind my neck and pulled me in for another kiss. The kiss deepened, and soon our clothes were discarded, leading to an unforgettable moment together. As our breathing slowed, we remained in each other's arms in silence. After getting dressed, we mounted our horses and rode back. We stabled our mounts, and without exchanging a word, she headed to the main house while I returned to my cabin in a daze. A shower helped me collect my thoughts, making me realize my feelings for Caitlin were far stronger than I had admitted to myself. I quickly dressed for supper. Entering the kitchen, I found Bill, Colleen, and Sam already seated, but Caitlin was absent. She soon joined us, taking the seat next to me instead of her usual spot by Sam. Bill and Colleen exchanged knowing glances, while Caitlin smiled sweetly. Throughout dinner, she engaged in animated conversation. Although her parents were clearly curious, they refrained from questioning her high spirits. After supper, she helped her mother clean the kitchen while Sam and I headed back to our cabins. Just as I settled in bed, a soft knock echoed at my door. Caitlin, wearing only my boxers, slipped inside and into my arms. We shared a tender kiss and she led me back to bed. She joined me after shedding her clothes, and we made love once more before falling asleep in each other's embrace. The blaring alarm at 5 a.m. jolted me awake and I groggily silenced it. Reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed, dressed for the day and left a gentle kiss on Caitlin's head before slipping out of the cabin. During breakfast, Bill and Colleen's scrutinizing glances made me wonder if they knew where their daughter had spent the night. After the meal, I loaded up the pickup for another day of setting fence posts. Working alone on the ranch gave me plenty of time to think. My thoughts wandered to my recent past, and I marveled at how much had changed in just 3 months since I left my wife. It felt like a lifetime. I reflected on the importance of Bill, Colleen, and Sam in my life, and then my thoughts shifted to Caitlin and the moments we had shared the previous day. I wondered if I could find a love like her parents had. When lunchtime arrived, I realized I had once again forgotten to bring my meal. Just as the thought crossed my mind, I heard a pickup approaching. Caitlin hurried out, running toward me with a bag in hand. She threw herself into my arms, initiating a passionate kiss before handing me the bag. Ignoring the meal, I pulled her in for another heated kiss. Although I didn't set as many fence posts that day, I did set my post in her a couple of times. Amid our moments of passion, we also found time to talk. I divulged the details of my former life, recounting how my ex-wife had betrayed me. "The only way I will leave is if you tell me to go," I reassured her. She eventually returned home, and I finished my day's work. After showering and changing, she was in the kitchen when I entered, once again choosing the seat next to mine. Midway through our meal, a knock sounded at the front door. Bill answered it and returned with the same guy who had been the first to call on Caitlin. The minute he was seated, Caitlin looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I was wondering if you'd like to go for a drive," he suggested. In this part of the country, where options were limited, going for a drive was essentially a euphemism for going on a date. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think my boyfriend would like it," Caitlin responded. She leaned over and planted a kiss on my cheek. Mr. Tall, Dark, and Handsome blushed and stammered before making a hasty exit. With that exchange, our relationship was now out in the open. I glanced at Bill and Colleen, noticing smiles of approval. In the following days, there were no more visits from local men calling on Caitlin. She made it clear that she was not available. I found a way to assist her with her plans. She was seeking a loan from the bank to purchase the necessary equipment for her veterinary business. The bank was hesitant to offer an unsecured loan, and the only option was to have her father put the ranch up as collateral. She was reluctant to ask him. I suggested giving myself a couple of days. I might have a solution. I contacted my offshore bank, setting up an account under the guise of a fictitious loan company. Caitlin filled out a loan application on my computer, which I had set up to route to my email. After waiting a couple of days, I sent her notice that her loan had been approved and a wire transfer would be made to her account. She was thrilled by the news but questioned why the loan only carried a 2% annual rate. I explained that they were a non-profit philanthropic group providing loans to those they believe would contribute to the community. While I could have simply offered her the money, I knew she was too proud to accept it. Having earned her degree through hard work, she was determined to succeed on her own terms. By the time Caitlin's license was approved, she had already acquired a new van, outfitted as a mobile veterinary office with all the necessary medical equipment. Once the news of her license status spread, she started receiving calls from local ranchers in need of her services. Many nights, Caitlin stayed with me in my cabin. Bill and Colleen were aware of this but seemed to have no objections. At 27, Caitlin was old enough to make her own decisions. It took 3 months for Wilson and his crew to face trial. The case was relatively straightforward. The smallest member cooperated with the prosecution, receiving 2 years probation without prison time. The 5 other hands working for Wilson each received 5-year prison sentences. Wilson, as the mastermind behind the rustling, was given the maximum sentence of 10 years and a $50,000 fine. After he was taken to prison, I initiated an investigation into him and his ranch, discovering that he was single with no family in the area. With all his hands incarcerated, there was no one left to run the ranch. This led me to formulate a new plan. However, before setting it in motion, I needed to address some unfinished business, finalizing my divorce. The thought of Janice getting half my money was not something I could accept. To achieve this, I turned to my friend Jake for assistance once again. Instead of sending an email, I called him and asked him to speak with Janice. I wanted him to convey that I had reached out and wished to propose a settlement in exchange for a divorce. The offer was a straightforward $50,000. If she declined, she would never hear from me again and would not receive any money. Initially playing innocent, she demanded to know why I had left and why I wouldn't return. The charade ended when Jake revealed that I knew about her affair with Brandon and her intention to divorce me. With her game exposed, Janice, still working as a waitress and struggling financially, accepted my offer. To proceed, I needed to return to Texas and engage a lawyer to draw up the divorce papers. Caitlin wasn't thrilled when I informed her of my departure. I explained that I needed to close that chapter of my life and assured her that I would return. Initially planning to leave my vehicle in long-term parking at the airport, she insisted on taking me and being there upon my return. Leaving behind my SUV and most of my belongings, except for what fit in one suitcase, seemed to ease her concerns. I departed on a Sunday, and upon my arrival, Jake picked me up at the airport. Staying with him and his family, I made sure to call Caitlin every night. By Friday, all the paperwork was sorted out. Jake took Janice to my lawyer, explaining that she would receive a check for $10,000 immediately, with the remaining $40,000 paid in 60 days after the divorce was finalized. She signed the papers, and my lawyer handed her the $10,000 check. I never had to face Janice. Then it dawned on me that I had sentimental stuff, yearbooks, and other personal belongings in storage, including treasures and heirlooms from my parents. Not wanting to return for them later, I rented a moving van and loaded it up. Caitlin was initially taken aback when I revealed I wasn't flying back, but once I explained that I was bringing back everything important to me, her excitement about my return grew. It took me 3 days of relentless driving to cover the distance. As I pulled into the Rocking Bee Ranch on Tuesday evening, I was greeted with an enthusiastic welcome from everyone. That night, Caitlin continued to extend her warm welcome until the early morning when we finally fell asleep, thoroughly exhausted. With the first part of my plan accomplished, I was now ready to put the rest into action. This involved making several trips to the prison where Wilson was incarcerated. My goal was to persuade him to sell me his ranch. Initially resistant, I continued to present my case. I pointed out that he would be imprisoned for at least 7 years, and even with good behavior, he wouldn't be eligible for parole. With no one to tend to his ranch, his house and buildings would likely deteriorate, and his cattle might perish without proper care in the winter. I also raised the question of whether he would be welcomed back after his conviction. Faced with the prospect of ruin, he eventually accepted my offer, providing him with something to start over with upon release. The next step was securing financing. Confident that Janice wouldn't risk losing her $40,000 by taking any rash actions, I moved my money back into the country. I negotiated a price of $5 million with Wilson, which was below the property's true value, making it relatively easy to secure financing. I made a down payment of $500,000 and financed the remaining amount. It took about a month to finalize everything, and I kept my activities a secret from everyone except Caitlin and Bill. I explained to them that I had personal business related to my assets that needed attention. Although it consumed only 1 or 2 days of my time per week, I set up a corporation and registered the land under its name. With summer ending and fall setting in, I hired someone to harvest the hay on the property. Additionally, I employed 4 hands to live on site and manage the ranch in the interim. The most experienced hand was appointed temporary foreman. I clarified that for a while, I would be an absentee owner despite my close proximity. I assured him he could always reach me by phone, and I planned to visit the ranch frequently. The final element of my plan involved remodeling the main house, a 2-story 5-bedroom structure in need of modernization. Despite Caitlin's frustration with my secrecy about my activities, our relationship continued to thrive. My love for her grew each day, and I sensed that she felt the same way about me. Meanwhile, her veterinary business flourished, requiring her to be on the road frequently, but she remained content and happy. It reached a point where I nearly spilled the beans to her about what I was doing. After returning from checking on the remodeling, she cornered me with questions. "What the hell is going on, Carson? Are you seeing someone else?" she demanded. "God no, I swear there is no one else. I just have some things I need to take care of. Please believe me, I promise I'll tell you everything soon. I'm asking for you to trust me," I responded. She scrutinized my face, searching for the truth, and said, "Okay Carson, I do trust you, but you better tell me what's going on soon or I'm going to kick your ass." I grabbed her and kissed her with all the love I had. As spring arrived and calving season began, the main house renovation was complete. It was time to execute the final part of my plan. One afternoon, when I had Caitlin alone, I asked her to go for a drive. I told her, "I've been thinking it's time for me to leave the Rocking Bee Ranch." Instantly, her eyes welled up with tears, and she said, "But you promised you wouldn't leave." I had timed our drive perfectly so that we arrived at the entrance to the former Flying D Ranch. I turned onto the private road and said, "I wasn't really planning on going far." She looked around, clearly puzzled. I'm not sure she heard what I said. She then asked why we were on Wilson's land. I delayed my answer until we pulled up to the main house. I told her to come on and that I wanted to show her something. I got out of the truck, went around to open her door, and took her hand, leading her to the front door and opening it. She asked again what the hell I was doing, worried that we could get in trouble. I told her to relax, that Wilson no longer owned the ranch, and that I wanted to know what she thought of the house. We went upstairs, walked through the bedrooms, and then back downstairs to the large living room, a nicely paneled den, 2 rooms set up as home offices, and finally, the kitchen. I could tell by her face that she loved the new kitchen. There was only one furnished room, the one I intended to use as my office. The rest of the house awaited her decisions on how to furnish it. I asked her what she thought of the house, and she said it was really nice. I asked if she thought she could live there, and she asked what the hell was going on. Seeing her confusion and growing agitation, I dropped to one knee and put my hand into my jacket pocket. I told her Wilson no longer owned the ranch that I did and I was asking if she could live there as my wife. Surprised, she asked if I owned the house, and I nodded excitedly. She screamed, "Yes." I then took the engagement ring out of my pocket, held it up and proposed to her. Her face scrunched up and her eyes filled with tears. At first I thought I had made a mistake until she tackled me onto my back and covered my face in kisses. She then presented me with her finger so I could put the ring on her. She looked around the house with new eyes, running from room to room and examining everything. I patiently waited until she came running back into my arms. "The house is beautiful, I love it," she exclaimed with enthusiasm. I led her to 2 doors opening off a hallway. "There are 2 offices, one for you to run your business and one for me," I said, earning another long kiss. I guided her into the office with the desk and pulled out a large piece of paper. It displayed a drawing of a property gate, labeled Double C Ranch. She examined it and asked what Double C meant. I explained it stood for Carson and Caitlin Ranch. Overwhelmed, she started pulling at my clothes and I joined in, stripping her off. I sat her on the desk and we christened the office with our love. In the following days, we made love in every room of our new home. After recovering and dressing, I told her it was time to share the news with her parents. She was so happy that she seemed to float out to the truck. We arrived back a little after 6, finding Bill, Colleen, and Sam already in the kitchen for supper. We walked in together, and Caitlin held up her left hand squealing, "We're getting married." Colleen jumped up to hug her daughter, while Bill and Sam came over to shake my hand and pat my back. I then received a big hug from my future mother-in-law while Caitlin embraced her father and Sam. Once the excitement settled, we all sat down to eat. Caitlin waited until everyone was eating. "Of course, this means we will be moving," she said as nonchalantly as possible. "What?" exclaimed Bill, Colleen and Sam in unison. She looked at me, prompting me to explain. So I said, "Well Bill, you know how Wilson wanted to combine his ranch with yours. I was thinking it could be a good thing." Bill stood up, looking furious and said, "There is no way in hell the Flying D was going to get his ranch." I chuckled and told him to relax. "It's not the Flying D anymore. It's now the Double C Ranch, and the new owners are right here at this table." In a puzzled tone, Bill asked what I meant. I clarified that I had purchased the ranch from Wilson, and now it belongs to Caitlin and me. Double C stands for Carson and Caitlin. Colleen quickly figured it out. I added, "Bill, my idea is to merge our ranches and manage them together. We would share the profits equally." Bill then pointed out that the Double C Ranch is more than twice the size of his ranch and generates significantly higher profits. I replied, "You've been doing this your whole life and I need your expertise. I want us to be equal partners. You would oversee all operations and your decisions would be final. Plus, it's part of Caitlin's ranch too, so it keeps everything within the family." Bill looked over at Colleen, who gave her nod of approval. He extended his hand to me across the table, and we shook on it. "Damn it, Carson, this will take some getting used to, but I accept your offer," he said. "This means we'll need more hands to manage, and that makes Sam the head foreman. Plus, it looks like I'll be removing all those fence posts I worked so hard to set on that side of the property." Everyone burst into laughter. That night, our supper turned into a lively and joyous celebration. Caitlin spent the night in my cabin, and by morning, we were exhausted and late for breakfast. However, everyone was still in the kitchen, waiting for us to eat before heading over to the Double C Ranch. Caitlin was eager to show off our new home. Everyone was impressed, and I noticed Colleen eyeing the refurbished kitchen with a hint of envy. It took Caitlin and her mother a month to furnish the house, getting it ready for us to move into on our wedding night. We got married on the Double C Ranch. Bill and his family were well respected and well liked, and ranchers and their families from miles around came to celebrate with us. As Caitlin's husband, Bill's son-in-law, and the new owner of the Double C Ranch, I was warmly welcomed into their community. That night, we finally made it to bed, where we spent the night and most of the next day making love. We would have stayed longer, but on the 3rd day of our marriage I took my bride to Fiji for a tropical honeymoon. Our first roundup that year was successful, and we sent a lot of cattle to market, making a nice profit. A significant portion went toward paying off the loan, but with Caitlin's veterinary business, we were living comfortably. We even built a new house for Sam, who now has a girlfriend close to his age living in town. It looks like we might have another wedding to plan soon. Another year has passed, and my beautiful wife has just given me the most fantastic news. She is pregnant. We are going to have a baby. Before I go, I want to say one last thing. Some may think I should have learned my lesson and insisted on a prenuptial agreement with Caitlin. If you believe that, then you do not truly know her. She is not like Janice. She works hard at her job and takes care of our home with dedication and love. She is very much her mother's daughter, and she shares her love with me every single day, with me and only me. Every time I look into her sparkling blue Irish eyes, I see that love shining back at me, reassuring me that I made the right choice. Now to the next story 5. Am I the A for cutting my dad out after he abandoned us for his new family and continues to harass me? Despite my pleas for peace? Original post, April 20th, 2024. When I was 13, my dad had an affair, left my mom, and moved in with his affair partner, who I'll call Jane. Initially, my sister and I visited him every weekend. Although he was a good dad, I never liked Jane. When Jane became pregnant and had their son, our visits became less frequent. My dad prioritized his new family, often missing my recitals and my sister's competitions to spend time with his son. When I was 16, Jane got a new job opportunity and wanted to move. My sister and I begged my dad not to leave, but he said, "I need to prioritize my family." He moved 10 hours away, effectively ending our relationship. I decided to go no contact because it was clear he no longer considered us family. My younger sister stayed in touch with him. He would call and invite me to visit with my sister, but I always refused. When he came back to see her, I would refuse to speak to him. I didn't invite him to my high school or college graduation. I'm now 33 and have remained no contact with him. Over the years, he has repeatedly tried to contact me and get his family to reach out on his behalf to reconcile. I've avoided family events he might attend, including my sister's wedding and baby showers. 3 months ago, my dad and his family moved back to our hometown. He has been relentless in trying to reconcile. I've received messages from my half-brother and sister wanting a relationship, saying he's a great dad. My dad found out I'm getting married and keeps trying to contact me, even reaching out to my fiancée. Jane messaged me, accusing me of breaking my dad's heart repeatedly and calling me pathetic, suggesting I need therapy. I replied that she was nothing but a home-wrecking whore and then blocked her. Everyone seems to want me to let him back into my life. I'm sick of the harassment and accidentally bumping into my dad and his family in town. Whenever I see him, I just walk away and refuse to speak to them. People keep saying he's a good dad who tried his best to stay in contact, but I pushed him away. I'm facing pressure from everyone. My mom, sister, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even some friends. My fiancé has even started saying I'm the asshole for shutting him out. It's all starting to get to me, so am I the A? Edit. Thank you for your comments. I haven't read through all of them yet, but it's a relief to see that most of you believe I'm not the asshole. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. I plan to have a serious discussion with my fiancé, as many of you suggested he should be supporting me. If he continues to side with my dad, I'll need to reconsider our relationship. With the wedding just 12 weeks away, this needs to be resolved soon. For your information, I own a local business, so moving away is not an option. I live in a small town where everyone knows each other, and my dad is friends with many people, including my fiancé's family. My dad didn't come back for me. He returned because Jane's parents needed help and care. He has not provided financial support since I was 17. He withheld my college fund to try and manipulate me into maintaining a relationship with him, so I had to work and take out loans. I've avoided events because my family uses them as opportunities to force reconciliation. He won't leave me alone and create scenes, approaching me as if nothing happened, trying to hug me, or starting to cry. I can't simply cut everyone off. Everyone, including my own mother, is on his side and against me. Edit 2 to provide more context. When my dad left my mom for Jane, he only wanted to see us on weekends despite my mom offering a 50-50 custody arrangement, which he refused. I didn't like Jane and was distant towards her because I knew about their affair. My sister, being younger, was more accepting of her. Jane was mean to me but kind to my sister. Whenever I was at my dad's, I felt uncomfortable because Jane would intentionally exclude me from fun activities or plan things only for my sister. We had several arguments over minor issues, but my dad always sided with her. My dad and I used to have daddy-daughter dates at least once every 2 weeks, but Jane put an end to that. When my half-brother was born, our visits decreased from every weekend to once every 6 weeks. My dad became absent, focusing entirely on his new son and neglecting me. When they decided to move, I was devastated that he chose to leave us behind. He didn't want custody, only occasional visits and phone calls, essentially parenting from a distance while focusing on his new family. After my high school graduation, which I didn't invite him to, things escalated. Jane and my dad called me terrible names, and he withheld my college fund, demanding I be part of the family again. From what I understand, he spent that money on his new family. I'm tired of missing out on family events. I would be willing to be in the same room as him without interacting or being civil, but he constantly pushes boundaries, making it impossible. Edit 3. Have spoken to my fiancé. Update will be posted shortly. Update 1, April 20th, 2024, 10 hours later. Thank you for all the comments. While most of you consider me not the A, there were some you the A responses. Some of the suggestions were helpful, and I plan to take them into consideration. I just had a conversation with my fiancé, and unfortunately, it didn't go well. Right now I feel overwhelmed and just want to run away and never come back. My fiancé, who I'll call Luke, knows my history with my dad and Jane. I explained to him that his siding with my father and pressuring me was hurting me, and as my fiancé, he should be supporting me. Luke told me he couldn't support me in doing something he believes is wrong. He said he had spoken to my father, understood both sides of the story, and believed that if we sat down and talked, we could sort this out and reconcile. I told Luke I didn't want that and wanted no contact with my dad, and I questioned why he was even talking to him. Luke admitted that his father, who is friends with my dad, encouraged him to speak to my father and hear him out. Luke said my dad loves me very much and always wanted to be in my life. He mentioned my dad having pictures of me, which I'm guessing he got from my family since my social media is private. Luke claimed my dad is heartbroken over our relationship state and that I was being unreasonable about him moving away when I was young. He said I got off on the wrong foot with Jane and wasn't innocent in the relationship's breakdown. He told me that everyone sees the truth except me and that I should look in the mirror because I'm the problem. Needless to say, I broke down crying and asked why he was doing this to me and not supporting me. Luke, who claims to love me, said he couldn't stand by and watch me be a heartless bitch. After hearing this, I stood up, told him he shouldn't marry a heartless bitch and walked out. I'm currently sitting in my car and my phone is blowing up with calls from Luke, but I don't want to speak to him. I feel like I'm losing everything and everyone, and I don't understand what is happening. Update 2, April 21st, 2024. Hello everyone, thanks for the comments and for letting me vent as I really needed an outside perspective. Many of you have suggested I cut all contact with my family and leave town. Unfortunately, that isn't financially feasible for me. My entire investment is in my local business, which has only recently become stable with a steady income. Relocating is not an option. I love my friends, family, and hometown. I grew up here, this is my life and I'm not willing to abandon it. I didn't expect to write another update so soon, but a lot has happened today. First, I agreed to meet my dad to talk and try to get him to back off and leave me alone. I asked my mom to arrange it, requesting it be just him, no one else. I wasn't sure if he would agree, but within 15 minutes of her calling, he was at the door. I asked my mom to stay and meditate. I told him to give me space, stop trying to get everyone on his side, and let me live my life. I expressed that he stopped being my father when he moved 10 hours away. I shared how mean Jane had been to me and recounted the horrible things she had said to me over the years. I expressed my resentment about how he chose Jane and his new family over me, and how he told me he had to prioritize them, essentially making me feel like I wasn't part of the family. I told him he was wrong for withholding my college fund, trying to blackmail me, and then spending it on his new family. I conveyed my frustration over missing major family events because he attended and made them awkward. I mentioned that I don't see his son and daughter as my family and am tired of them trying to speak to me and approach me. I told him he keeps causing scenes whenever he sees me, making me look like the bad guy. I expressed my anger about him inserting himself into my life by attending my fiancé's family events and going behind my back to talk to and influence Luke. Lastly, I told him how much I hated that he cheated on my mom, broke our family apart, listened to Jane, stopped our dates, missed my recitals, reduced contact, and prioritized his son. He began by expressing that he loves me and always has, and he's determined not to give up on reconnecting. He feels he's given me enough space over the years and is tired of hearing about my life secondhand. He doesn't want to miss any more of it. He admitted his love for Jane and said he can't regret his past because it gave him her and his 2 kids. Though he wishes he had ended his marriage with my mom differently. He insisted that his kids are innocent and don't deserve my hostility. They simply want to know their big sister. He mentioned that I was a difficult child. Often rude and disrespectful to Jane, breaking her belongings, calling her names and ruining day trips. When Jane got pregnant, she was high risk, and my frequent visits and arguments were causing her stress. For the sake of her and his son, he decided to stop the weekend visits, although he still spoke to us on the phone and took us out for dinners and day trips, just without overnight stays. His son was born premature with health complications, requiring prolonged hospital stays, and Jane suffered from postpartum depression, which meant he couldn't see us as much and had to miss some events to take care of Jane and his son. Jane couldn't find a local job, and the opportunity they found was too good to pass up, so they had to move. He emphasized that he returned to town as often as he could to see us and always invited us to spend vacations with him. He called every day, but I refused to speak to him. They flew in for my graduation, but when I didn't invite him, he lost his temper and withheld my college fund. He apologized for this and tried to give me the money a few weeks later, but I refused it. He assured me the money is still available whenever I ask for it. He visited me at college to try and talk, but I refused to see him. He insisted he won't miss family events and that he causes a scene because he misses me and wants to reconcile, but I always run away or shout insults at him and Jane. He has been trying for 16 years to reconnect, but I shut him down every time. He just wants to be my dad. He acknowledged his long-standing friendship with my fiance's dad and hoped my fiance could help open a line of communication. He believes I never gave Jane a fair chance, despite her efforts, and he hopes we can at least be civil. Jane hates knowing I speak ill of her, am mean to her children, and refuse to talk to him. He expressed that he wants us to attend family therapy sessions together. He also wants to spend one time with me, for me to stop being rude and mean to his children and to spend time with them. Additionally, he wishes I would stop speaking poorly about Jane and actually give her a chance. He asked for an invitation to my wedding and to walk me down the aisle. On my end, I want him to stop communicating with my friends and using others to try and talk to me on his behalf. I want him to keep Jane away from me entirely. I am willing to be civil at events or in town as long as he does not try to hug me or engage in conversation. My mom intervened, telling him that some of his requests, especially regarding Jane and his other children, were unrealistic. We reached a temporary agreement. I will attend 3 therapy sessions with him when he arranges them, and my mom believes I should also seek individual therapy. He agreed to stop interfering in my life and relationships and to keep Jane away from me while talking to his kids to give me space. I agreed to be civil in public as long as he respects my personal space and does not approach or pressure me. Regarding my fiancé, I haven't spoken to him yet. He showed up at my mom's house, but she refused to let him in. He and his family keep calling and messaging me, urging me to hear him out. During my conversation with my dad, I discovered that my dad has paid for most of the vendors and services for my upcoming wedding and has been in communication with my fiancé for quite some time, longer than I realized. Luke had told me his family paid for these and I believed him. I feel betrayed and unable to trust him. I know I will have to speak to him eventually, but I am not ready yet. Update 3, April 27, 2024. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for taking down my posts. I was extremely upset and felt overwhelmed, needing space to think without being bombarded with messages. While some of you were trying to help and I appreciate that, the abusive messages I received were truly terrible. I'm providing this update for those who have been supportive and asked for one. This will be my final post, and I won't be posting again. To begin with, the agreement with my dad is no longer valid. He couldn't even manage a week without violating my boundaries. Therefore, there will be no therapy sessions with him, and I will maintain no contact. As you all know, after discussing things with my dad and setting conditions for moving forward, he was supposed to keep Jane away from me, tell his kids to back off, and not pressure me or invade my space. It lasted all of 3 days. Everyone seemed happy that I had forgiven my dad and told me so. My sister was excited that I was willing to give him a chance and, with some persuasion, I agreed to have dinner with just her and my dad. However, when my sister and I arrived at the restaurant to meet our dad, he was not alone. He had invited Jane, my grandparents, and his son and daughter. He got up and tried to hug me. This breach of trust was the final straw. I realized that my dad would never respect my boundaries or truly understand the hurt he caused. It's clear that reconciling with him under these circumstances is impossible. I regret letting my guard down and allowing him another chance to disappoint me. I've decided to focus on the relationships that truly matter and bring positivity into my life. For those who have supported me through this difficult journey, I thank you. This will be my last update, and I hope to find peace moving forward. I immediately became upset and asked why they were there. My dad told me that if we had any hope of repairing our relationship, I had to accept Jane and my younger siblings. I told him he had just broken our deal and to never contact me again and tried to leave. He refused to let me leave and grabbed hold of me. When I say all hell broke loose, I mean it. I started shouting at them. My dad, Jane, and grandparents tried to gaslight me and convince me to sit down. When that didn't work, things got very heated and a shouting match started. A lot of unforgivable things were said by my dad and Jane, including remarks about my appearance and calling me a psychopath. My half-brother walked out of the restaurant, and my half-sister started to cry. My sister actually surprised me and defended me, shouting at my dad for ruining things after all this time when I had finally given him a chance. She even slapped Jane. She got me out of there and apologized to me. I think this was the first time she had really seen how Jane was with me and how she treated me. She kept saying she couldn't understand how Dad had spent years saying he would do anything to have me back and then did this when he finally got his chance to rebuild the relationship. My dad has been trying to contact me, but I have blocked him and refused to talk to him. I have also refused to speak to my grandparents. My dad has tried to convince my mom and sister to speak to me, but I think he's burned his bridges with them. The incident at the restaurant has spread and some people seem to be backing off. Like I said, what my dad and Jane shouted at me was unforgivable and they were overheard. This is a small town. Hopefully, people will back off, and those who won't, I'm going to have to cut them out. My sister is currently very upset with our dad and Jane, refusing to speak to them and blaming them for my decision to go no contact again. She's also not allowing them to see her children. I don't know if she will reconcile with them, but right now she is extremely angry. My mom is also furious and apparently had some strong words with my dad and Jane, promising me that she will never pressure me to speak to him again. I have decided to start individual therapy, as I believe it's something I definitely need. I feel bad for my half-siblings because they haven't done anything wrong, and I might be open to having a distant kind of relationship with them in the future. However, I'm not ready for that yet and I'm not sure if I ever will be. I did send them a message on Facebook to apologize and let them know they've done nothing wrong. In terms of my fiancé, I spoke to him yesterday after being silent since walking out on him. He admitted that his father had pressured him into speaking to my dad and fed him a sob story about a misunderstood father desperate to reconnect with his daughter. Luke had become frustrated with my refusal to attend his family events and my departure from his mother's birthday party upon realizing my dad and Jane were there. He was facing pressure from his family about me ruining their events and just wanted everyone to be happy, clearly at my expense. Luke admitted that my dad had paid for some of the wedding vendors, but he didn't know this until after it was already done. His father had told him that he and his mom had paid. My dad had claimed it was a gift and his way of contributing. Luke also admitted that my dad had asked him to speak to me on his behalf. I told Luke he had betrayed my trust and I couldn't see myself marrying someone who doesn't support me. He broke down crying, apologizing, and promising never to do it again. Luke was heartbroken and begged for a second chance. For those of you who wanted me to break up with him, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but we are going to try to work through this. Apart from this issue, he has been the best partner, and I genuinely believe he was manipulated by his family and my dad. Luke has promised to stand up to his family and cut contact with my dad. I'm still staying at my mom's as I need some space, which I won't have if I move back home. Next week, we will contact our wedding vendors to see what our options are. Luke is begging for a postponement rather than a cancellation. We may still break up, as actions speak louder than words, and I need to see if he can rebuild what we had and show me I can trust and depend on him. Update 4. May 4th, 2024. Hello everyone, I hadn't planned to make another update, but I've been receiving numerous messages asking for one, so here are the recent developments. First of all, I have called off the wedding. Although I managed to get partial refunds, I did lose some money. Despite Luke pleading with me not to cancel, I couldn't see myself marrying him after what transpired. Initially, I was willing to give him a second chance. He assured me he would limit contact with his parents and stand up to them, making it clear that we would not tolerate any interaction with my dad and Jane. He intended to tell them that we wouldn't attend any events or parties if they were invited and that we wouldn't accept any attempts to force a relationship with my dad. However, after meeting with his parents to discuss this, he returned irritable and seemed to have reconsidered. He tried to persuade me that his family meant well and that he couldn't limit contact with them because he loved them and couldn't control their friendships. He then suggested it wouldn't be an issue in the future, as his father would talk to my dad and ensure he behaved around me. At that moment, comments from others echoed in my mind, especially the concern that if we had children, he might take them to his family, where my dad and Jane would be and I would have no control over it. It became clear to me that I couldn't trust Luke and probably never would. I ended our relationship. Luke isn't taking it well. He keeps begging me to reconsider, even promising to cut off contact with his family. His family and friends are also trying to convince me to stay with him. However, he has shown me that he lacks the backbone needed, and I don't want someone like that in my life. Regarding my dad, I'm currently exploring the possibility of obtaining a restraining order due to the incident at the restaurant. A friend is assisting me with this process, but I'm not sure yet if it will be possible. Since last week, my dad has remained relatively quiet, aside from a few attempts to apologize. My sister continues to refuse any communication with him or Jane. Unlike me, she is very confrontational and has openly criticized them on social media about the restaurant incident and past events that I was unaware of. This public criticism led to a heated altercation in town where Jane demanded my sister take down her posts, resulting in Jane assaulting my sister. My dad sided with Jane, which has caused my sister to despise Jane and cut off contact with our dad, despite his attempts to reach out to her. Their reputation has suffered significantly due to the restaurant incident and my sister's public posts and altercation. This has resulted in people gossiping about them, which has been somewhat beneficial for me as it has made some people back off. However, a few individuals, including my ex's parents, still support my dad. There isn't much new to report regarding my half-siblings. I have found a therapist, though there is a waiting list before I can begin my sessions. Currently, I am living with my mom, who is fully supportive of me. Additionally, I will be picking up a new kitten next week. Update 5, May 19, 2024. 2 weeks later? Hi everyone, I thought I would give you an update on what's been happening over the past couple of weeks for those who are still interested. Firstly, I'm still living with my mom, and I've got my little kitten. I've named her Sasha, and she's the sweetest thing but very energetic. For those asking for pictures, I'll try, but she refuses to stay still long enough for a non-blurry shot. I already adore her. My mom continues to be my rock. I'm still waiting for therapy, but I'm finding Reddit useful and therapeutic. The support I've received from most people here has been great and has helped me see things more clearly, so a big thank you to everyone. Regarding my ex, now that we've broken up, I feel lighter and freer. Being away from him has made me notice all the red flags I was blind to in our relationship and I feel like I've dodged a bullet. Luke, using real names because my posts were discovered, is not taking the breakup well and has taken over from my father in constantly bothering me. If you're reading this, Luke, we are done and I'm not changing my mind. So stop calling me, stop coming to the house, and stop sending me flowers. I'm moving on, and you should too. My sister Emma is still firmly on my side and has cut ties with Jane, the stepmonster. They are not on speaking terms after my sister told everyone about Jane's affairs. Jane is still trying to save face, saying my sister is lying and telling everyone she can how we are just the worst and that we have treated her terrible over the years and trying to ruin her marriage. Don't think anyone is buying what she is saying. She has sent abusive messages to me and my sister, and when we've bumped into her she's been screaming at us and threatening us. My sister's car had been keyed and my store windows were smashed. We can't prove it's her unfortunately, but she is the most likely culprit. My half-siblings are definitely my dad's children. They tested them years ago when she was a baby. From what I've heard, they're not speaking to Jane at all. As for my dad, he seems to have grown a spine and has kicked out Jane. She is now living with her parents. From what I've heard, he's thinking about divorce. I haven't had any contact with my dad except for a text saying he was sorry for everything. As for getting a restraining order, I'm more concerned about getting one against Jane at the moment. Relevant comment. OP mentioned that she has cameras at her place, but their current angles do not clearly capture if it's her, so she is getting them adjusted for better coverage. When asked if she would forgive her father and give him a second chance without Jane present, OP explained that he has already ruined her relationship, his and Jane's relationship with Emma, and apparently his own as well, all because he couldn't respect her boundaries. She stated that the damage is already done, he had his chance to make things right with her, and he blew it. She just wants to be left alone and move on with her life. Update 6, July 27, 2024, 2 months later. Hi everyone, it's been a while, and some of you have been asking for an update. Firstly, my dad and Jane are still together. They broke up for a while but are now back together, presenting a united front despite her infidelity. Apparently, they decided to try again for the sake of their children. Interestingly, my relationship with my dad has improved. We occasionally text and are cordial when we see each other. He has stopped pushing so hard for a relationship and is respecting my space. We can now be in the same place and room without causing a scene and have even had the occasional coffee together, which is all I ever wanted. He also gave me my college fund with no strings attached. My step-siblings and I have started talking and following each other on social media. My stepsister sometimes comes to my business to help out. I realized that they were not at fault, and I was being unfair to them. They are still upset with their mom but are stuck living with her and, from what I gather, are giving her the silent treatment. Regarding Jane, I still have a strong dislike for her, but at least she is staying out of my business. Unfortunately, I couldn't obtain a restraining order against her due to a lack of evidence. I avoid her and won't speak to her, and I think my dad has warned her to keep her distance. My sister is speaking to our dad again but despises Jane and refuses to have anything to do with her, actively excluding her from everything possible. This situation has brought me and my sister much closer. As for Luke, we are not back together and never will be. While he has not fully accepted this, things have calmed down, and I'm not being harassed as much. He still hopes to reconcile, but I'm not interested. His friends and family will eventually accept this. He believes that because my relationship with my dad has improved, I will soften and forgive him too, but I just can't trust him. On a personal note, I have started therapy and am working through my issues. I've come to realize that the strained relationship with my dad wasn't solely his fault. I share some of the blame as well. I've spent my life feeling abandoned by him when, in reality, I also pushed him away. My business is doing well, and I'm focusing on myself. Thank you all for your support. One comment noted how remarkable it is to see your personal growth and the obstacles you have overcome. The commenter emphasized that you should take immense pride in the progress you have achieved in your personal life and relationships. Another comment advised you not to let anyone hold you accountable for adult-level responsibilities for events that occurred when you were a child. They pointed out that your father, being the adult, had the sole responsibility to nurture the parent-child relationship. They further asserted that his decision to move away from his children was entirely selfish and not your fault. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.